Okay, Madam Clerk, just a moment, okay? Not yet. Okay. Waiting for the technology to fire up. We're all raring to go. Technology has to fire up. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to read off first. Members of the public, you're advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the City's website. Other individuals and the media may also be audibly and/or visually recording this meeting. Also, remind you to please put any of your Blackberries to silent mode as we commence our GIC meeting this morning. A couple of notes of interest. I'm just going to mention Councillor Duvall, I understand may have to leave or does have to leave by 2:45 for an event, and the mayor has to leave at around noon for an event, so we're going to keep an eye on quorum this morning, do the best we can. Yes, Councillor Morrow.
Madam Chair, I have to leave at just after 10 for a few minutes as well. So
thank you. Then I'm going to ask respectfully that our colleagues watch for quorum. I have you till 10 tonight. Thank you, Councillor Collins. You might have to take the chair because I have another meeting at 5:30. I understand. Thank you, sir. Okay. Now, Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda this morning?
Yes, good morning, Madam Deputy Mayor. The changes have been distributed to the committee this morning, and they include...
Everyone, if you want to listen, the clerk's just giving us an overview of changes, please. Thank you.
Thank you. The changes include 2 added notices of motion. 10.1 is with respect to a partial relocation of the Ottawa Street Farmers Market, and item 10.2 is a YWCA request for capital investment and increase to annual operating grant. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. And members of committee, I'm just going through added, so you gave the partial location. Members of committee, before requesting a motion to approve the agenda as amended, I'd like to advise that we'll be moving into closed section at 1 p.m. for item 12.3, private confidential agenda, as arrangements have been made for outside auditor to attend the meeting to provide information to committee. I may also be bouncing around this morning because we have a school group coming in and they're not supposed to be here till 10, so we see how the meeting's going on. Now, may I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended? Moved by Councillor Partridge, second by Councillor Johnson. All in favour? Are there any declarations of interest this morning? Seeing none, thank you. Members of committee, can I have approval of the minutes of the previous meeting dated May the 7th, 2014? Or are there any questions? Mover, Councillor Pasuta, Councillor Marula, all in favour? Thank you, everyone. We have item 4 is delegations requests before us today. Item 4.1 is delegation request from Lorna. Councillor Johnson?
4.1 and 4.4 are all here for the same reason. For June the 18th, and I respectfully move all 4.
Okay, Madam Clerk, should I read them all out or is that sufficient? It's been moved? Sufficient. Second by Councillor Partridge. All in favour? Carried. That's for June 18th. Now we're going to move on to consent items. Members of committee, you have before you consent items 5.1 to 5.8 inclusive. Are there any items? Actually, I'm going to go through each one. Item 5.1 is the Hamilton Police Services monthly report. Questions, Councillor Johnson?
Nope.
Move it. Seconded. Councillor Farr, all in favour? Thank you. Item 5.2, minutes of the Arts Advisory Commission dated March 25th. Questions, comments? Moved by Councillor Farr, second by Councillor Morrow. All in favour? Thank you. Item 5.3, Hamilton Municipal Parking System renewal of parking lease, car park number 80 at 191 King Street West and 22-30 Bay Street South. I understand, Councillor Farr, you have some questions. Will we keep this under consent item or you're okay? You're going to move it? Thank you. Moved by Councillor Farr, second by question, Councillor Partridge. Can I have a seconder though? First, Councillor Clark. Okay. Councillor Partridge, question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I just threw you to staff. The recommendations for leasing, it talks about how much money it's going to cost us to lease, but there's nothing in here about the financials and the revenue that are generated. And I'm wondering if someone could speak to that, please. It just seems like a lot of money, and I'm just wondering how much revenue we realize from that.
We've got Mr. Arnold coming down. Thank you.
It's not my day.
Through you, Madam Chair, the 2013 net revenues on that lot was approximately $100,000.
What?
100,000 for 2013? I just want to clarify that I heard you correctly.
That's correct, the net revenues, yes, after
The
expenditures.
net revenues,
Yes.
okay. And so we're spending over 5 years, $1,290,000+, and yet each year it's only netting us revenues of $100,000? Is that a fair statement?
That's correct, Councillor.
So we're not covering our invested costs in the leasing, is what I'm hearing.
Through you, Madam Chair, no, the net revenues after all expenses, including the lease, is $100,000.
Okay, and is that, thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor, through you to Ted. Now, does that include the operating side of it as well? That includes staff, costs, all costs, all in? We still make $100,000 per year? Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, that's correct. That includes the hydro costs, snow removal, line painting, and so on.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Clark.
And the maintenance? Maintenance? Like normally, we would have a report indicating exactly what's being netted out. I don't have that, so that's why I'm asking.
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, yes, that's correct. All maintenance costs are included in the expenditures.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Sorry, Councillor Partridge, second time.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. And not to harp on this, but I'm just wondering, why did the report and recommendations come forward without any report that included the revenues and the breakdown of expenses? I mean, it seems like it's a half report here. I'm just concerned. I personally would prefer to have all of the facts and figures in front of me. Through you to staff.
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, it's a renewal of a lease, and we didn't include the revenues.
Well, yeah, and I get that, because there are none here, but respectfully, I would like to know what our costs are. I'm hearing verbally that it's $100,000, but I don't have anything in writing to back that up.
Through you, Madam Chair, we can provide that information quickly and circulate it to all the council.
Yeah. I would move a motion to table this until we have a complete report back. If I can get a seconder? Councillor Johnson.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So that's been tabled. All in favor? Councillor Farr.
No issue with that. I'm sure it'll show over time a consistency in terms of profitability when you factor in everything, including operating costs and maintenance. But I will ask if this is this 5-year lease is privy to time through you to Ted or whomever.
Is there a time constraint on the renewal of this lease?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, no, that's not an issue. I believe it's that the lease expires in October.
Thank you, everyone. So it's been tabled, and respectfully, I'm just going to suggest to staff that maybe going forward when we have similar reports like this, that they be all-inclusive for the councillors in their deliberation on the material. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Item 5.4 is the development of the farmers market policy. Questions, anyone? A motion to move it? Moved by Councillor Pasuta, second by Councillor Whitehead. All in favor? Thank you. Item 5.5, Hamilton Downtown Multi-Residential Property Investment Program. 137-149 Main Street West. It's a change in corporate control of Jackson Hospitality, Inc. Any questions? Moved by Councillor Farr, second by Councillor Morrow. All in favor? Carried. Thank you, everyone. Item 5.6 is a request for support on the Morriston bypass. Councillor Partridge.
Yes, I'll move it if I can get a seconder, and then I'd like to speak to it, please.
Moved by Councillor Partridge, second by Councillor Johnson, and back to you, Councillor Partridge.
Okay, thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. And I just wanted to say how This really does affect the economy of the city of Hamilton as well as the surrounding municipalities. Some of the major businesses that we have located in Hamilton, such as Tim Hortons with all of the franchises here, and also Canada Bread and Maple Leaf Foods. That corridor going up to Morriston is block solid every day, many times a day. And the Morriston bypass was actually approved back in 2009 and just hasn't made it into the 5-year plan for the provincial government. So I was asked to actually sit on the joint committee for the Morriston bypass, along with Diana Moriali, staff person, and Neil Everson, and we've had a couple of meetings, and you can see by the list of corporations in there that we've got quite a strong group, and we're really going to be pushing for this bypass to be built sooner as opposed to later. So I'm very happy to support this. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Pasuda.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Did a bit of research on this. I didn't realize there's this coalition going on, and the bypass will be going through Ward 14, my ward. It's the cutoff there between, just before you get to Maddaw Road, so a little bit north of Campbellville Road, where it narrows to 2 lanes and goes across. I have had some discussions, particularly yesterday, a lot of discussion, trying to figure this out, where it's going and how come I got missed out of this coalition. Particularly, and I've got the report in front of me here and the traffic impacts and that, but I think we're missing out on the larger picture. It's beyond Tim Hortons or beyond the Nestle's with the water. There's so much agricultural products moving from Western Ontario, heading its way down into Hamilton. There's grain, corn, soybeans, winter wheat, hay coming down, particularly the grains. They come down into Parrish and Heimbecker and make their way over to Richardson's Grains. Bunge, the soybean processing crusher plant down here, receives a lot of product coming in. And particularly this morning, I paid a lot of attention to the traffic on the road because I was stuck on there for an hour and a half coming in. And there's milk trucks coming down, milk trucks from the north heading down number 6, excuse me. Steel going up and down on trucks. There's galvanizing plants in Guelph that makes their trips into Hamilton to do a lot of galvanizing that goes back up. It's just amazing how much, when you pay attention, how much trucks go back and forth. And it is a pinch point down there. I'm just wondering, and I'm asking staff, and I should have maybe asked this question offline, but they're looking for $4,000 from Hamilton. I know Guelph hasn't put into it yet, but this is not bonusing in any way. Through Madam Chair, to anybody on staff that could speak to this, because we got corporations in here like Nestle's and of course your Tim Hortons and Concast and North American Construction. I'm just wondering. Through Madam Chair.
I see Mr. Everson and Diana.
Through Madam Chair, no, I don't believe this would be bonusing. It's an advocacy campaign of all concerned parties, including other municipalities as well as ours.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We have a mover and seconder. All in favor? Carried. Thank you, everyone. Item 5.7 is terms and conditions for the use of the Downtown Public Art Reserve, Wards 1, 2, and 3. Questions, comments? Mover, Councillor Farr, second by Councillor Morrow. All in favor? Carried. Thank you, everyone. 5.8 is the annual compensation legal services report. Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor. I have a question for legal. The report has numbers attached to the various categories, except for the final category, which is the support to council. If you look on page 11 of 11, all of the previous pages have some indication of activity and costs. So on legal services provide support to council, we have had a case where legal in the past has provided legal help to a member of the council, but we haven't seen the actual number attached to that. So I wonder if I could ask through you to Janice whether that number is available, the cost to provide legal services to a member of council.
So through the Deputy Mayor, the last category is really intended to be a bit of a catch-all and just speak to the variety of other sort of non-file matters to which legal services is providing ongoing support. So that's why it's sort of a catch-all, and there isn't really a number, although I suppose one could count the number of hours of that legal counsel are spending supporting the city's various committees. So I appreciate the question, and I don't know that we're necessarily going to count the hours, but I think there's a substantial number of hours. In terms of support for individual members of council, certainly we do provide support for members of council on issues relating to city business, anything that arises out of their role and duty as elected officials. If I'm understanding the question correctly, am I understanding whether we have captured somewhere in here the time spent, for example, dealing with a matter that was covered under the city's indemnification bylaw? Is that?
That's correct. We had a counselor charged and a court case followed and a subsequent court case. And so I'm interested in knowing what the cost to the taxpayer was for that process.
So the litigation and the file matter that was covered under that I believe that the mayor is referencing was really predated my coming and certainly predated this report. There was, though, indeed an amount that was provided which was required under the city's indemnification bylaw because it met the criteria of the bylaw, and that amounted to just under $13,000, which covered all of the matters that were covered under the indemnification bylaw. I believe it started in 2011 and finalized at the end of 2012. So
There was a subsequent matter on an appeal, and I'm not sure whether we were participating in that as well. Subsequent to what you just discussed. So were there any further costs provided in the second subsequent appeal case?
all of that is included when I say just under $13,000. That's everything all in.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
And I've got Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you very much, and through you, Madam Chairman, to Janice. Janice, I'm looking on page 8 of 11, and it's a chart showing municipal charges. Excuse me. And it's kind of an interesting chart. It just shows trends over the last 3 years, where the animal control is 794, then 369 in 2012, and then 760 in 2013, or building 30, 19, 26, pretty flat. Public health 237, 173, 224. But the red light camera one jumped off the page at me, where we expected to see a trend down in those charges once we went to red light cameras, where in fact they've gone from 9,700 to 13,523 to 15,569. So of $17,000 charges under that chart, 15,559 were red light camera. And I believe it's $325 every time the red light camera flashes at you. And so I've seen us use the red light camera fund. It's gone up exponentially, the amount of funds we're collecting on that to be able to take on projects. I believe with the red light camera, whether you're 0.2 seconds of a late or 2 seconds late, it's the exact same charge. It's not a escalating thing, because I believe there's a delay between a yellow to a green going in the other direction. Should we be taking a look at that? Is that an issue that, first of all, it certainly promotes safety in the roads. It enforces people who are running red lights. But should someone who is 0.2 seconds late pay the same as someone who's 2 seconds late because of that millisecond decision you make, whether it's jump on the brakes or hit the gas pedal? And any thoughts on this? It's just such a significant spike, and it makes up almost 90% of the offenses in the chart that's before us.
So through the Deputy Mayor, that's an interesting observation from the councillor and an absolutely accurate observation that the red light cameras are increasing, the red light camera charges are increasing with the number of cameras that are erected. And it's interesting, yes, there is no nuance between being sort of a last-minute red light runner or an early red light runner. One is captured, and that's sort of the strength of the charge. It's the province that put the program together going back about a dozen years, and I don't believe, I could be mistaken, but I don't believe we're entitled to vary from the province's established regulatory framework for this. But what's really interesting is just this morning I heard on NPR some discussion about some major studies across the United States with the experience of red light cameras, and the experience is that while they are very effective, they do not ever really reduce the incidence of running the red lights seems to be there no matter whether there's red light cameras or not. So the feeling is that there are those who will persist in running red light cameras, and the studies indicate which days are primary days, and Friday afternoon of Memorial Day weekend seems to be the big day for running red lights. And so there is definitely a need to deter the activity of running a red light, which obviously leads to fatalities. So,
Because my fear here is that some members of the public are going to see this as a cash cow. For people who make that millisecond decision, hit the brakes or hit the gas, and if the 0.2 a second is a snap of your finger, and boom, it's the same fine as $325. So you're telling me, through you, Madam Chairman, that the province sets the fines and sets the criteria whether you're 0.2 a second or 2 seconds late is the exact same fine? That's not something we have control on?
no, my understanding, certainly in dealing with this over the years, it's the province that established the framework. It's the province that establishes the fines, certainly, and it's the province that establishes the fact that there's no discretion between 1 second or 2 seconds. But remembering that there's a yellow light leading into the red, so it doesn't go from green to red.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. When you see that 90% of the fines we're issuing are red light cameras, I'm not sure, we have to figure out what the message is in that. How many red light cameras do we have now, Madam Chairman? Do you know, Janice? Barry, no?
Through you, Madam Chair, I believe there's 12, but we're in the process of increasing that at the request of council.
I don't think there's any in Ancaster, but there's a difficult one on Main Street where you come down the hill.
It all comes out. It all comes out.
Okay. Okay, I just, if you take 16,000 times $300, that's a lot of money. We're collecting in this, and as I say, of the 17,000 offenses, 15,569 are red light cameras. I just wonder what the message is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clark.
So, just so that I am reading this metrics correctly, the first part of it, Madam Chair, would be the actual charge being laid, if you will. That's not actually any time in court. That's just the ticket being laid, the charge being laid. Is that correct? And so everything underneath would be the actual time in court. So we don't know of those items up top, how many of them actually get challenged in court. It doesn't really go that far in the report. It just indicates overall what the disposition is. It'd be interesting to see how many people, for example, the red light camera, just accept the fine and pay it, or choose to go to court to fight it.
There's no defense.
So that's through the Deputy Mayor. That is a correct observation. This chart doesn't really dissect and provide all the detail on what the various iterations of the proceeding of that charge were. It's just the sort of the raw data of the numbers of charges.
And do we have, when they go to court, the justice can subsequently raise the fine or issue a different fine if there's a dispute in the court? Do we have those findings in terms of
Through the Deputy Mayor, we obviously, I don't have them here for you, but we could be gathering that data. I think that would require a lot more refinement in how we gather our data. We certainly have the information. It's on our files. It would require us to start to
My point in it is that we're frequently challenged because the amount of court time that our lawyers are dealing with, but the court time on items like this are a direct result of someone objecting to the initial POA. They don't tend to be in court arguing if they're pleading guilty. And so it would be interesting to see what that outcome was in terms of they've pled guilty or they've pled not guilty to any of the POAs. You go through the process, and as a result of that process, so many were found not to be guilty, so many were found to be guilty, and what was the disposition of the fines at that particular point? Because they're usually much larger at that point than a ticket.
Through the Deputy Mayor, that would be interesting to pull that information together, and we can certainly do that. I would like to just make two comments, and one is that rarely, if ever, will a set fine be raised at the conclusion of that process. The fine will be the set fine. But having said that, we are definitely experiencing in our courts more and more Section 11B charter arguments, which Council may have heard of in the past as the ask of argument, where this has taken too long, the charge should be thrown out. And typically, those have not been a problem in Hamilton until the past year or two, and our numbers of those are starting to rise, and I'd be happy to, speak about those at another time, but certainly that speaks to the volume of charges that the court is having to deal with. And so, some of the things that we can do about that, I'd also be happy to speak to you about.
Madam Chair, perhaps in the next annual report that we get, if we could have the charter challenges and just an update in terms of what is actually happening. It was predicted by your predecessor that it was going to hit us eventually, so it'd be interesting to see exactly how bad the situation is getting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Now can I have a mover and a seconder on the receipt of the annual comprehensive legal services report? Moved by Councillor Ferguson, second by Councillor Johnson. All in favor? Carried. Thank you, everyone, and excellent timing. Now we go to our public hearing and delegations, and then we have here, they just arrived. Good morning and welcome. Members of the committee, we now have the public hearings and now call upon Laura Ryan to introduce the students from Westview Elementary School and their Photo Voice project.
Good morning, Madam Deputy Mayor, Mr. Mayor and councillors and staff. So I'd like to introduce Westview Middle School. They're from Morriston, which is Councillor Whitehead's ward. They worked through February on a great project called Photo Voice. I'm from the Neighbourhood Development Strategy, and I worked with Sharon McKinnon from Public Health as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Justin, who's going to introduce and lead the presentation. Thanks, everyone. Oh, here you go. So we're going to put it right over here for you, kiddo. There you go.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and councillors. We are from Westview Middle School to bring you a presentation called Photo Voice. I hope you will enjoy our presentation.
What is Photo Voice? Photo Voice is a group analysis process that uses pictures to collect information and to tell a story. That story is then shared to help create positive change for the group members and their community. First, First, we mapped the neighborhood assets, needs, and points of interest. Then we created a vision for Rollston neighborhood. We walked around the neighborhood taking pictures to gather information. We organized those pictures into themes and then prioritized the most important assets and needs. Finally, we reported our evidence back to the school and now to the city.
Our vision of Rollston explains what we want for our neighborhood now and in the future.
One of our priorities is get rid of graffiti because it sends a bad vibe through the community, making the people feel unsafe. Also, it makes the property look dirty and not well taken care of.
Priority 2, more garbage cans in the community. Trash is everywhere and all over the bins. Garbage is bad for the environment. People can get injured.
It's unsafe for people to drive on the roads if it is a big enough pothole, it could get stuck, especially bikes.
Priority 4, improving relationships. Sometimes the elderly people complain about noisy Westmount High School students going to Westmount Recreation Center to eat their lunch and use the recreation facilities.
There is bumper-to-bumper traffic before and after school.
Someone slipped and was nearly hit because most people drive cautiously, but it is so busy. Because of all the traffic, a recent accident occurred. It happened outside of Westview Elementary School. While a mother was dropping off her child, a 6-year-old boy got hit and was stuck between two cars.
Luckily, he was not injured.
Thank you for coming and have a great day, everyone.
It is us as councillors that need to thank you for all the hard work you've put into this and presenting to us today. Thank you very, very much. I have some questions that councillors have. I'll go to Councillor Johnson first.
First of all, thank you very much for coming in. This was awesome. And it took you a month or so to get this done? Any of the kids want to?
Oh, yes, anyone want to answer the question?
There's confidence here.
We had a series of 3 meetings in, I think, January. February. Whoa, time flies. And the second meeting, we went out and took photos. Wait, no. Second meeting, it was snowing. So the third meeting, we took out and did photos, and then we also presenting to the school, and then Laura and another public health nurse suggested we come and speak to you guys. So it's been a great honor. Thank you.
And again, if you don't mind, I just have a couple of questions. You put up 5 priorities. Was there any other priorities that you just couldn't put up there because there was just too many, or that was all? Was there 5, or was there any others?
Go ahead.
There's a football field right beside Westview, and the garbage cans always overflow, and there's litter all over the place.
Wow. So the last question I have for you, were any of these priorities a surprise? Did you go out there to your neighborhood thinking, I know what's going to be the problem, but the one that surprised you, were there any surprises? Pretty well knew what was going to go on?
I think that most of us knew what was going to go on, as we do experience the things in the community, and we're not just seeing what it is, we're also participating in it.
You're an expert at living there. Thank you very much. This was delightful, and I'm sure that your counselor has taken lots of notes.
Writing feverishly. Thank you. Mayor Bettina.
Thanks. Great presentation. And I'm interested in all of the priorities, number 4, which says, sometimes the elderly people, being in that category, complain about the noisy Westmount High School students going to eat their lunch or use the recreation facilities. My son went to Westmount, and it's a great school. But I'm curious to know how that came about. So could someone explain that one? Did you talk to elderly people, or what happened?
At my church, there are several
people who are really involved in the community. And I was just talking to them one day about the new facility and how much I enjoy going to swim there. And so they were just saying, oh yeah, I was there and I was enjoying the peacefulness, and then there were so many students, they all came, and they're like a rampage, and they're noisy, and they're really disruptive to my Zen mode.
Do you have a Zen mode? Are you in Zen mode? Yeah. So is there an answer to that? Like, I just wonder if there's a better understanding of the students about, the issues with the seniors, and whether the seniors or elderly can be a little more open-minded about the youth. Did you get a sense of the balance of it at all?
I'll just field this one a little bit.
Yeah.
So I've actually spoken to staff at Westmount Recreation Centre as well, and just mentioned the comments that these students had made. And I've also, through the neighborhood action work that I've done, I've received a call from at least, actually I think 2 or 3 seniors, that one mentioned specifically an incident that had happened. And so I've carried that forward to staff. I'm not entirely sure where we go with that. We don't have the answers yet. We're starting with the questions and the concerns, but I think that the fact that this group of grades 6, 7, and 8s can identify relationships in the community as a priority is a pretty incredible and insightful way to start.
I thought that was great. Yeah. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's great to see all young faces coming forward, future leaders, future doctors, lawyers, welders, auto builders, whatever you choose. It's great to see that you got active in the civic neighborhood. I had asked the staff to take a look at Rolston as part of this whole development. So the whole effort in pulling everyone together, identify issues, and build a sense of community in Rolston has been driven by this council, and I want to thank my colleagues for providing the staff support to get this moving. It's a very diverse neighborhood. There's 4 schools. So when you talk about the traffic issues, it's one of the few neighborhoods that has 4 schools. And obviously that puts a lot of enormous pressure in regards to drop-offs and pickup. We have, and I want to give you some comfort on that particular issue. I've been sitting down with the 4 principals. I've been sitting down looking at using Westmount and the parking lot as a drop-off area so we can try and get more traffic off the roads. We're trying to encourage parents to enter into bus or walking buses. So basically where parents would, and we do have one actually in that neighborhood where they're walking along and picking up all the children going to school. The parents take turns doing that. So more of that type of activity to get the traffic off the road. So we are working on that particular issue. Westmount, I heard the same issue in regards to at lunchtime. They love the center and they go in there and utilize it during lunchtime. And of course, there's a huge lobby area there, and a lot of the senior programming is upstairs, separate and apart from the youth, but a lot of them like to just lounge and rest in that particular area. So it is an issue that we have to work with staff to try and sort out, so I'm really pleased that you brought that forward. And it's funny that you had the picture, because I showed that exact picture, probably had a little more garbage, where those containers were and it was overflowing. And that's actually at a city townhouse complex. And that's just before the school. And the funny issue is that where it's located, you have no choice but to see it as you drive by. You have no choice but to see it. It's always overflowing. And we've been trying to work with the Hamilton Housing to either find another location or address this issue because it's been a chronic issue. This is better than it has been in the past, but still not good enough. So again, you re-emphasized an issue and concern that has been raised by the other members of the community. I really thank you for reinforcing that. Keep up the good work, stay involved, and thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clark, then Councillor Duval. Councillor Clark?
Sometimes over here, Clark sounds like far. I'm in my Zen mode. And it works. We should all practice it. I do want to compliment the children for coming out, grade 6 and 7. I actually judged a public speaking contest at Billy Green School, grade 6 and 7, and I came home absolutely stunned at how they can speak like an adult, so comprehensively understand the problems, and I went back to when we were in grade, and it was not the same level. We were at a different level back then, and you guys have done exactly the same thing today. I mean, how you put your thoughts together and how you understand the problems and the comprehension, it's actually amazing, and credit goes to the teachers, because I'm sure the curriculum is challenging, but to get the kids to understand it and go out and relate to it, that's a tremendous feat. So congratulations for your efforts, but for the gang that's here, your courage, way to go, excellent, and I'll go back to my Zen now.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Duval.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of you. And I've looked at some of the ideas that you're asking for changes, and I just want to let you know and improve the traffic around the school areas is very, very important in this city. It's happening everywhere. We're all having the challenges, but we have to come up with some kind of solution. So I know at Lawfield, we worked together when we used the arena as a back parking lot and made a trail to help the students go there instead of running across the streets back and forth. So where we can come up with those ideas, we're trying to implement them and work with the schools. So that's very important. And then the other issue where I see the garbage containers, talking to Councillor Whitehead, these are exactly what we're trying to do in Hamilton Housing. We don't know why this was allowed to have these green bins when they can have curbside pickup. And because this discourages recycling, and it also allows for illegal dumping that creates a mess. So we fixed that up in other areas, and I'm going to take this address and I'm going to take it to the board and find out if we can get some type of improvement. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, and I'll just make last comments. You've certainly heard that what you've presented today has already got the wheels in motion to address a number of the issues that you raised, so we want to thank you again. So your voice has been heard. And just on improving relationships, to just remind you that you're the next generation going into the high schools, so certainly you've been here dealing with the seniors and understanding their concerns. We're all getting there, and certainly I hope that you'll carry that forward when you become high school students also. But I want to thank you again. That was excellent. We really appreciate this. Councillor Partridge.
Yes, thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor, and welcome everybody. Congratulations. That was just excellent. My question through you is actually to Laura. Laura, this is such a great project. Are there any plans to roll it out in any of the other schools?
That's a great question. I've partnered with Sharon McKinnon, a public health nurse. I work with neighborhood development, social worker by trade.
Right.
And we've created a toolkit, and it's in the midst of being fancied up by graphics here at the city so that it can be rolled out. Through funds from neighborhood development. That kit is not just the toolkit, it's also 5 cameras. It's a pop-up banner so that you can host your own art show with it. It's all the tools anyone in the city, adult or youth or child, would need to create a project just like this one. And we've done 8 of them, plus a couple of additional ones. And we're available.
So thank you.
Welcome.
Because Madam Deputy Mayor, in Waterdown we have Healthy Communities, Healthy Youth with Penny Deeth and Lynn Winegood, and it's a tremendous program, and this I think would be absolutely fit right in with their mandate. So if I could be so bold as to ask you to connect with them, or whoever on staff would be appropriate, I think this is something I would love to see the students have the opportunity to engage in, particularly those in the Waterdown area where it's more walkable. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone. May I now have a motion to receive the students' presentation? Moved by Councillor Partridge, second by Councillor Whitehead. All in favour? Carried. Thank you, everyone. Thank you again. Yes, absolutely. Okay, we're going to move on to item 7, which is presentations. Members of committee, I'm going to now call upon Helen Tomasic for the presentation respecting the Employee Attendance Report 2013, which was referred from the Audit, Finance and Administration Committee. Helen, good morning.
I sort of look like Helen.
So we're a threesome.
Yep. So if I can, through Madam Chairman, just I'm going to kick this off, and followed by Zach Nichols and Helen. The reason why I'm here is the matter that was brought to your attention back in November, December of last year regarding absenteeism, I think caused you great concern, caused the community great concern, and obviously myself and the leadership of this organization. Any time that you're reporting on an annual basis absenteeism numbers that range from 10 to 11 days on average is going to raise the eyebrows of many people. So with that, we want to come back here today to talk a bit more about what's behind those numbers and what do they mean and what we're going to do about them. Frozen? Just, oh, wait a minute.
Can you push the space bar?
Yeah. Are we all right? This one here? Okay. Well, yeah, there we go. I guess if we turned it on, we'd be all set. Okay. Sorry about that. So today what we're going to cover here in the next several minutes is, as you see in front of you, I'm just going to provide a bit of an introduction, speak to the matter of short-term disability, what it means, what's included in it. And then we're going to talk a bit about, and this is where Zach will come in to explain some new software that we've been employing to better understand what's behind the numbers and what we're going to be able to do about them in terms of absenteeism. He's going to speak to the business intelligence solution technology that we're employing and the benefit of it. He's then going to take some time and present to you some short-term disability analysis, which is going to help you, I think, better understand where we're at. And then Helen's going to remind you of the questions that you had asked, not only when we presented late last year, our report, but also some questions that were asked by this committee during the budget process, and then speak to our management action plan. So with that, in summary, what do we know about the short-term disability absence in 2013? Well, first and foremost, 20% of staff account for nearly 80% of the total amount of absenteeism that we're experiencing. So, which is, I don't know if it's surprising to you, but it's not. There isn't a great deal of or a number of people that are in fact driving our totals the way you see them. The next point I think that's worth knowing, because I think over the last several years we have produced numbers that range somewhere between 10 and 11 days on average per employee of absenteeism, and I'm going to speak to this a bit more in a few minutes, but the majority of employees have an average of 3.38 incidental paid sick days, and the balance or the other types of absenteeisms make up the rest that add up to the 10 or to 11 days on average that people are away, and I'll speak to that in a second. And then I just wanted to make the point that the investment that you had made a few years ago in terms of return to work services staff in fact is producing payback. We are getting people back to work earlier rather than being home being paid for not working. We're able to get them back to do a variety of tasks which are important to this organization. But let's just to begin with, let's be clear on what the categories of absenteeism are. And you can see the definition of what employee absenteeism is. It's unplanned work, absence due to illness, injury, personal reasons, or failing to come to work. So that is by definition what absenteeism is. And then we have basically three categories of absenteeism. We have the short-term disability, which is anywhere from a day to 130 days. We have long-term disability, which is more than 130 days. And then we have the matter of workers' compensation. And these are absences due to occupational injuries or disease, which there's a whole program that's associated with that, which you well know. But we're going to focus today, I think, for the most part, on what's behind the short-term disability. So in terms of the benefit plans, they really fall into two major categories, and we've identified a third here as well, which is less significant. But basically, the two major benefit plans we have are the income protection plan and the sick bank plan. The IPP covers 85% of our employees, which is somewhere in the order of just over 4,000 employees. And again, it provides income protection for up to 130 days. And employees are given a mix of anywhere from 100% protection to 66.6, depending on the number of years of service here at the City of Hamilton. The other program we have here, the sick bank program, principally applies to our firefighters, covers about 10% of our eligible employees, and employees accumulate 1.5 days of sick bank coverage for each month of work. And then, of course, we have our crossing guards. Some of these employees still have sick bank coverage from a previous plan, but are no longer accumulating the credits. So that, in short, is our benefit plans. And then the different types of short-term disability. Incidental sick absences, this is single absences of less than 6 days. And typically when we say that, what we're referring to is, people who are experiencing flus, colds, those illnesses that you find that you're away for a day or two. And that we don't require automatically a doctor's note. That isn't to say, though, that if we suspect there are issues, that we can, in fact, ask an employee to produce a note. The significant sick absences are those from 6 days to 130 days in length. And in terms of single absences, last more than 24 hours for sick bank employees. Now, this is where we find that the bulk of time is being accumulated. And this is for those employees that are experiencing what we would all consider significant illnesses. In this case, anything to do with, as you see, cardiovascular, cancer, surgeries, mental illness, fractures, things that are significant in nature. These are all covered by a medical doctor's note. You cannot find yourself falling into the category of significant sick absences and not have a medical note explaining why you are away. And so that's important. And of course, this group of people is managed by our Return to Work Services staff. And when I say that, it's not just their responsibility for getting people to come back to work, although they are there to kind of track who is taking or falls into the category of significant sick absence. They are there to work with management to get people back to work as soon as possible, and have had a fair bit of success doing so. Modified sick absences, where people are absent part of it, but because of the Return to Work program, we're able to get them back to work sooner than we have in previous years. And then, of course, the last type of disability that we experience is maternity-related sick absence. So obviously, women in our organization that are pregnant or require a leave as a result of pregnancy are able to be covered by our program. Now, I'm going to turn the floor over to Zach Nichols. Zach came to our organization a couple of years ago. He used to work for DeFasco doing IT work for them, covering a number of their programs. We've been able to kind of steal him away to join us and to on loan from our IT department to HR. So Zach, over the last several months, has been not only implementing the new software, which he's going to explain to you a bit about in a moment, but also to assist with the analysis. And so, what I can say is that, and Zach will point this out quite clearly, is that what we are able to do for the last several years on absenteeism and what we're able to do now, not only does it give us a much clearer understanding of the challenges that we face, but it also is lending to some of the solutions that we're going to be able to bring about in this organization. So with that, I'll just turn the floor over to Zach, and you can go from there.
Thanks very much. Good morning. So before we get into the analysis, frequent question with business intelligence technology is, what does that really mean? And business intelligence is really a broad umbrella, and a lot of people put different things under there. So the analogy that I've been using with HR over the last few months goes back to childhood. My family, as a kid, we had an old aerial antenna up on the roof. And if you wanted to, change the channel, you had to get up first and turn the rotor so that the aerial antenna would swing around. My grandfather had a real fancy TV, had a clicker. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this technology. My parents didn't have the fancy one. We had to get up and turn the dial until it broke, and then you had to get the pliers out and change the channel with the pliers. The image that TV had, it got the job done if you wanted to watch hockey, and at that time, that was the best technology that you had for watching TV. Today, my TV at home is connected to the internet. My universal remote, controls everything between my toaster and my TV. Your phone can be used to, control your security and your lights at home, change the temperature. And the crystal clear high-def picture that you're getting with today's technology, really is a good analogy for what we're talking about here. Where, on the left, we used to look at absenteeism from the cheap seats at the top of the arena. This new technology is really bringing us down to ice level, giving us a real clear picture of, the game that's going on there. So what are we really doing? With older technology, it was really designed for input-output. How do we, process and administrate absenteeism at the city? And those systems were designed back at a time when storage space was expensive. Now it's a lot cheaper. We can afford to leave data all over the place, and we're restructuring our data into analytical models. These are really fat from an IT perspective, and in the old days would have cost you a ton of money, but now, really allow us to restructure the data in a way that works for us. Process-wise, we're changing as well, where we used to have a reporting cycle that was once a quarter, run the report, see what comes out of it. Now we're really moving to more of a daily, reloading the data each night, recalculating what's going on, figuring out the costs, and then allowing managers with self-service tools to look at that each morning. And that's moving us from, retroactive reporting into a more proactive strategy. The BI value chain down here at the bottom, it's all about, understanding our data, putting correct context around that to turn it into information, looking at that information to figure out what knowledge we've now gained of the organization, and turning that into action, which delivers, value back to the organization. So what does that mean for absenteeism? That's a pretty general BI, thing. With our legacy tool, we used to look at the total cost of 390,000 hours of paid sick time last year. And our legacy reporting would allow us to break that down into the department and then the division level. And that's really where the legacy reporting stopped. Beyond that, we really needed to know what we were looking for before we went to get it. So if we knew there was a problem with an employee, we could run another report to get more detail. But if we didn't know it was there, it was really difficult to find it. With the new technology that we're employing, we drill those divisions into section levels, the sections really into depth IDs, the depth IDs into employees, the employees, here I'm drilling employee B into the 2 absences that they had. And even that absence, breaking it into the pieces to represent the months where it actually occurred. And we're storing all of this data. It's not a one and done kind of situation. With all of this data residing in a database somewhere, now it changes the game completely. We can go and ask questions and not know, what we're necessarily going to see as an answer, as opposed to knowing what we're looking for before we go and get it. So that, really a much deeper drive in a vertical stream down into the data. And because we have gone back and done this with all 7 years of sick data that we have in the database, it gives us a much better horizontal picture. And so here we're looking at 5 different employees with varying levels of absenteeism. Employee B has no absenteeism through those years. Employee E down at the bottom, touching on a few years. Employee C, and this quickly enables us to highlight and see trends with employees, trends with departments, cutting and slicing and dicing the data around a number of different dimensions. So technology improvement, obviously, bringing technology to a problem that we have here at the city, enabling us to make a more targeted response in our actions that we're doing. This provides self-service reporting to our managers on the front line, supervisors, so that they have a better understanding of what's going on, and enables us to come back here and answer your questions better at council. So one of our first findings that Chris talked about is the Pareto chart. And what we did here for this chart is plot out all the absenteeism for every employee in the city in 2013. And in the bottom left-hand corner, we're plotting the employees with the highest level of absenteeism. And as you go up the curve, it represents employees with less and less absenteeism until you get up to the top of the curve here. And those are the employees that are taking zero sick time. So your employees with the highest sick time at the bottom left, and as you go up to employees with zero sick time. And what you can see here is, when we look at the first 20% of staff, the first 20% of staff with the highest absenteeism, they're representing nearly 80% of our sick time. And then there's also a trend with the staff that contribute zero sick time in a year at 27%. This is a pattern that holds up year over year, basically, but it's not the same people in these groups necessarily. So the employee who might be contributing to this 20% because of a heart attack, a very significant illness with a lot of sick time, is not having a heart attack every year. And that speaks to a little bit of the challenge for return to work services. We're talking about 20% of our staff representing 80% of our sick time, but 20% of our staff that are eligible still represents 1,000 employees. And that's 1,000 employees that are different each year that are moving in and out of that group. The next thing I want to talk about is significant sick time. So Chris talked about significant sick time. This is documented sick time that's greater than 6 shifts in length. And I think the comparison here between the number of hours that fall into this group and the number of occurrences is very important. So 59% of our sick time in 2013 was significant. It was medically documented. It would be associated with something you consider more of a serious illness. But this really only represents 8% of the occurrences that return to work staff are dealing with. The other side of that coin is the incidental sick time, the stuff that's less than 6 days. And this is where the majority of our employees fall in. This is where, this is the type of sickness too, when I'm talking to family and friends, this is the type of sickness that they tend to talk about, phoning in for 2 days or 3 days. And I think this is where there's some confusion or where people get really upset because they think an average of 10 days, that sounds absolutely. When I first got to the city and I heard an average of 10 days, I stood up and I'm looking around my cubicle. I'm going, who's taking 10 days off? Because this doesn't seem to add up. But when we separate this data and really look at it and go, well, really the incidental average for the average employee is 3.38 days, this is starting to make a little bit more sense. Then we've got another group, a smaller group of employees with this really significant sickness. And I think it's really important we separate those two. When we're looking at averages, it's very dangerous sometimes because it'll give you a very misleading picture of what's going on. So just on the bottom of this slide, the chart here, I just want to point out, within the incidental sick time as well, the majority of these occurrences are 1 and 2 days. And the costs, it's 49% of our costs for incidental sick time, falling in that first 2 days of occurrences. Just want to, get a better picture of what's going on in that group as well. So jumping back to IPP and significant sick time, kind of along that same thread, this is a small group. There's 4,355 eligible employees in 2013 for IPP. Only 724 of them had a significant illness in that year. And that represents, about 17% of our eligible employees. The average sick time for these employees, if you take the sick time that they have and just divide it amongst the 724, averages out to 40 days, 40 standard 7-hour days. And it makes sense when we start to get into, what's causing these problems. We're looking at people that went off for surgery and are needing a number of months or weeks to recover, cancers, heart attacks. These are more, serious illnesses that are taking time in there, and some that stretch even longer. So when we're talking about short-term disability, very important to remember it's everything from 0 days up to 130 days. One employee taking 130-day absence is the same as 43 employees taking a 3-day incidental absence. The impact from that one employee can get very large very quick. So this represents $5.8 million of our total costs for 2013, a significant chunk. When you include the sick bank from employees, that adds in as well. For 57% of total costs, it's 59% of hours. I'm getting a little crazy with the numbers, but you get the picture. The other group that we talk about is maternity-related absence. I like this slide because I think it's a great example to talk about where averages can, take you down the wrong road. The third column here, paid days per eligible employee sick because of maternity-related illness. Every eligible employee at the city had a half day of absence because it was related to maternity. Obviously not true. So With this group, an average of 35.29 days, and we can, see our average age there at 33.9. This technology, the data modeling, the ability to crunch these numbers and slice and dice, really giving us an ability to get in there and understand what we're dealing with. The last one that I'm going to talk to is modified sick trends, and Chris talked to this in the definition section. Modified sick time is the sick time that we pay for employees when we're bringing them back into work from a situation. So maybe the employee was off with a broken leg, they're not able to come in and do their role, and now Return to Work Services is working with the local management. They're figuring out how to modify the job so that employee can come in and contribute in some way, and that is going up. Council, made an investment in some staff in late 2010, and immediately you can start to see, things taking a rise in the chart there. This is an important group that we want to grow. It sounds counterintuitive, but we want this type of sickness to go up because when we don't have this, it's significant time. If the employee's home with a broken leg, we want to find a way to get them back in some. We don't want them staying home until they're physically able to run to work. We want to get them back in some respect, doing some sort of job that provides value. So for 2013, that represents $371,000 in paid sick time. The average length of occurrence here is about a half day. So some of these employees come back and start with just a short part of the day, working their way up slowly to a full day. That trend carries year over year. It's an average of a half day occurrence. And our inference from that is, if we're paying them for a half day of sickness, it's a half day that they're providing in value as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Helen to address some questions you guys have brought up at previous meetings.
Sorry, you just move.
Okay, councillors, Helen, just 1 second. I know I have councillors that wanted to ask questions. Do you want to take a break now and ask the questions of Zach?
I'm not going anywhere, so.
Do you want, or should we just finish the whole presentation? Because I have 5 on speakers list already. So let's finish the presentation, and then I have you on first, Sam. Thank you. Go ahead, Helen.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, members of council. I have before you 3 questions that were specifically addressed during discussions of the AFNA committee as well as during the budget presentation. There was a question around the sick bank model. There was a question around, can we identify the core of employees that are contributing to absenteeism at higher rates, and should we change when we ask for a medical note? Okay, So first question, sick bank model cheaper, and does it result in less sick time? The simple answer is no. When we look at the IPP employees, we have a total of 4,325 who are on the income protection plan. The bulk of our employees who are on a sick bank plan are 523, primarily from our Hamilton professional firefighters. The total cost per IPP employee is $2,107, and for our firefighters, it is $4,306, which is basically double. 28% of our IPP employees had no paid sick time in 2013, and 17% of our firefighters had no paid sick time in 2013. Sick bank plans are plans that many organizations are moving away from because of the financial liability that comes with these plans when employees leave the organization due to retirement or resignation, because typically they are plans that require 50% payout of the sick bank at the salary level the employee is at when they leave the organization. So what many organizations have done is introduced income protection plans for new employees that enter that particular organization.
Madam Chair, IPP, what's that stand for?
Income protection plan, which is the plan that the majority of our employees are on, where they get paid either 67% of their income or 100% of their income while they're off on STD, depending upon their years of service. That's correct. It's a very good benefit that the city has for its employees. Okay, what's my problem here? I'm pushing the wrong. There we go. So the simple answer to the next question was, can we understand and identify who the small core group of employees are that are contributing to absenteeism at higher rates? And I think Zach has demonstrated very well that we are able to do that now. We can identify the top 10 to 20% who are contributing to the highest rate of absenteeism. We have been doing analysis over the last 3 years and are producing lists for our management in the various departments to take a look at. And particularly, we're looking at employees who've had a consistent pattern of absenteeism of 9 days or more over the last 3 years, for the general managers to work with their management teams, take a look at these employees, see if they've been involved with return to work, what's going on, what kind of plan can be put in place for these employees to support them to be at work. So the last question that was asked was, should we change when a medical note is required? And when we look at this information and data, I would say from the outside, it's not a simple question. It's one that requires a lot of dialogue with management and probably members of council as well. We do know, that we require a medical claim form after 5 days of absence, and this is a form which tells the employer what the employee's abilities are and what their restrictions are. In the majority of IPP, in protection plan absenteeism, in fact, 69% of our employees are taking 2 days or less, and 85% are taking 3 days or less. So we can identify through the business intelligence solution exactly who the employees are who have high incidental absenteeism, and look at their patterns and determine whether they are individuals we should be asking for a medical claim form at day 1, day 2, whenever we want. We have that ability within our collective agreements. We would caution against using a corporate-wide policy for everyone on this matter, because as you can see, we've had about 27% of our employees in 2013 who had no absences. And to ask someone to produce a medical claim form the first time they have an absence after many years of being absence-free, they might say, well, is this a don't you trust me? So I think we would like to start from a position of trusting our employees, developing the rapport and having a line of dialogue with our employees, and use this lever at times when we suspect there is something going on, that maybe their absenteeism is not legitimate. There's all kinds of things that come out when one has conversations with employees about their attendance. It could be they're dealing with challenging issues on the home front. They may need some flexibility in their work. They may need some other considerations to keep them present at work. So the other question we were asked is, what of our strategies are working? We've been at this now for a couple of years. What is going well for us? Firstly, we'd say that this business intelligence tool and the expertise that Zach has brought to HR as being our HR metrics analyst, and actually he's not on loan, Chris, he's one of ours now, sorry IT. It provides improved accuracy and precision and capability for us that we did not have prior to 2014. It gives management now a tool to do just-in-time coaching and conversations with employees instead of waiting for those monthly and quarterly reports coming out of human resources. And the other thing that's exciting for human resources is it allows us to look at all kinds of other metrics and analytics about our people across the organization to help us manage our workforce better. I think this intelligence tool has demonstrated the value of return to work services, who's a team that I've seen working incredibly hard, who've had increased caseload over the last couple of years. They've done a great job working in collaboration with management in the organization to bring our employees back to work sooner. And as I look at the data of our significant absences and see that what's happening in the workplace in terms of our older employees, this work accommodation is going to become increasingly more important to us as an organization. The Attendance Support Program. This is our program where employees sit down with their supervisor and their review of their absenteeism pattern is discussed. We've looked at the data over the last 7 years and can demonstrate a correlation between those supervisors who are having the conversations with their employees have lower absenteeism rates. So certainly there is always some tinkering and some improvements that can be made to the program, and HR has been listening to the inputs from the unions and our employees and management to make refinements to improve its effectiveness. We went into some full-scale training of our supervisors and managers, and we're starting to realize the return on this training. This is a culture change for many supervisors and managers in this organization to have some of these tough conversations with their employees. We're coaching them through these conversations. We're encouraging them to ask for medical claim forms if they see the need to do so, and we are starting to see an impact on incidental absenteeism. And as we work through all of the supervisors, we hope to see that trend continue. The other part of the health, safety, wellness continuum is what we're doing to engage our employees in wellness initiatives, and we have had a number of successes here. We do know that our employees are accessing employee, family, and support services, which is a very good thing. They have very good service for our employees. We have on-demand learning resources available to our employees on any topic you can imagine, and these topics came about by recommendations from frontline staff and management of issues that our employees are confronted with. And we've checked in 2013, employees had a total of 3,356 viewings of the videos that are provided there. Our influenza immunization program, health screening, our occupational health nurse will go out and do health screening with various work sites, and that has proved valuable in at least the 85 individuals who are identified as having high blood pressure or high cholesterol levels with a notice perhaps you should see your physician. So when we look to the management action plan, we revisited the plan that we put together back in 2012 as a senior management team and highlighted the areas that we wanted to emphasize going forward. First and foremost was to continue the communication about the expectations around attendance, reinforcing what supports are available, making use of the tools that are now coming out of the HR business intelligence solution, and where appropriate, establish action plans. And if appropriate as well, look at overall your section and whether you could set some targets for your particular area. We are providing managers with a list of employees that we've identified through the BI tool. And as Council knows, we have implemented a very aggressive performance accountability and development system and are encouraging managers to put performance objectives into their performance accountability plans around their effective management of attendance. We're encouraging our management to include healthy workplace initiatives in their corporate culture plans. And importantly is the last one, management working with their joint health and safety committees and looking at the data around musculoskeletal strains, slips, injuries, and putting in a proactive preventative strategy to decrease the occurrence of WSIB claims. So Human Resources obviously has their role to play here. We're providing the data for the management staff, identifying the hot spots. We will continue to do the training. Experience tells us that we need to be diligent on that and continue it and refresh that training with our supervisors. We are looking at moving and have moved those illnesses that are related to chronic illnesses or episodic illnesses, having them managed by our occupational health nurse to free up the time for the manager to focus on their incidental absences. And we're in the process now of rolling out self-service. I believe Zach has been out to each of the general managers to show how this works on their desktop. We have to work through some security issues as we make data available to the extended management. Council's members have asked us questions about what are the additional costs that come with absenteeism. Of course, the figures that we are presenting to you are those figures of lost productivity, the cost of our employees being at home instead of being at work. Of course, in many situations when an employee is at home and the department is delivering an essential services, they may need to bring in contingent workers or increase overtime. And we're now doing some modeling so that we can better understand that, and hopefully we'll be able to address that in our semi-annual report that we come back with in September. And lastly, we've had a tough year in the city of Hamilton. Many workplaces have had challenges with the weather we've had in terms of slips and trips. And also, it's been an unusual year for a virus. I don't know how many people here have had family members have the 4-week cough or cold. And so it'll be interesting for us to look at how does our population within the city of Hamilton compare to what's going on in the broader city. And so we're working with public health to do that kind of analysis. So in conclusion then, to reiterate, 20% of staff accounting for nearly 80% of our absence, the average incidental absenteeism being 3.38 paid sick days. Our focus is going to be on incidental absenteeism, absenteeism patterns, and areas of unexpected high absenteeism. We're going to provide management with better tools to more timely address absent management issues in their work units. We see the benefit of our return to work staff and the work that they're doing in bringing people back to work sooner. And we'll continue to use the HR business intelligence solution to advise us on our strategies. And our intent in future is to present the data to you, segmented according to the various types of absenteeism, which much better informs what's going on in the organization. So,
thank you very much. That was excellent. Thank you, Zach and Chris. I'm going to just name off the speakers list. I'm going to start. It's Councillor Marula, Councillor Johnson, Councillor Clark, Councillor Collins, Councillor Whitehead, and Councillor McHattie. Councillor Marula.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Many thanks for the presentation. Let me first start off by saying, Zach, that was probably one of the most interesting presentations I've ever been subjected to in 14 years, and I commend you for that. Yeah. With respect to the content now, Zach, when you looked at the statistics, what percentage of the employees took time off between the 1 to 6 days, took time off on a Friday and a Monday?
I'm doing a lot of playing around with the data and testing out some different stuff. We've recently just gotten into some analytics, looking at the day of the week and how it corresponds with the length. And it needs a bit more work. But the patterns around, starting an absence on a Friday or a Monday, there's some correlation there. We really need to drive back and understand, causation.
All right, so if we could perhaps have that reported back to us, because I think that's an important piece of this discussion. Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, my understanding, and it's really to protect those that don't abuse the system more so than anything else. And I think for those that don't abuse the system, when they see their colleagues or other workers abuse it, that's when I think it's our responsibility to come forward and protect those that aren't abusing it. And I really believe that there is abuse. I think there is in every corporation. When you have thousands of employees, I think it would be naive to suggest that we don't. And in saying that, I believe that they abuse it in order to pad their vacations, which correlates to Fridays and Mondays. And I think the way you deal with this in an expeditious manner is to lower the bar from having to provide a doctor's note at 6 days, which I think is out of the ordinary. I think normally it's 3, and bring it down to 3 and evaluate accordingly from that day forward. Because I mark my words that you'll see a decrease substantially just by that one simple move, and I will move that motion accordingly later on in this meeting. Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, with respect to evaluating, we've determined that their cost is $12 million. Is that what the cost is?
Total, through the Deputy Mayor, total short-term disability cost for 2013 was $12,307,000 change.
So now we know that the cost, what the cost is. I think evaluating the carrot versus stick analogy, incentives for the vast majority of our employees that are not abusing, and taking those savings, once we do see those savings come to fruition, and providing incentives to others so that when it comes to a Friday or a Monday and someone wants to pad their vacation, they'll think that there is an incentive for them not to, because at present there isn't. And it is a cultural thing to you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I think, having worked for the Ministry of Health, worked for the Hamilton Separate School Board, I saw it firsthand, and even at Queen's Park. So in essence, there is a correlation between the Fridays and the Mondays. There is a correlation between not having to actually be accountable. And through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, decreasing it from 6 to 3 makes people accountable. And we have a responsibility to do that today, more so than anything else. That's as a start.
So through the Deputy Mayor, back to your comments, we've done a lot of analysis in this area, and Helen, when she's covering off the question, should we lower it, and it depends. It really is a tricky point, because we look at parts of the data set where employees are required. With the sick bank program, fire is required to bring a doctor's note after 24 hours, which is one shift now, immediately. So they're essentially bringing documentation for every absence. And when we look at that group, we're also talking about a different plan, but their absenteeism levels are higher. Then we went to other parts of the organization where the agreement with the union is that they're required to bring doctor's notes after 3 days. And this is a statistically very small group, so not wanting to drive policy off of this, but the patterns there are very enlightening. Employees that are required to bring it after 3 days, a very high statistical number of their absences are 2 days. A large number of 2-day occurrences, almost no 1-day occurrences. What we're interpreting from that is, if you're going to make me bring a note at day 3, I'll make sure I'm sick for 2 days every single time. So with those two kind of examples, the concern with bringing it down to a certain level is that you're going to get into a gameplay with them. And then the other, overriding part is we've got this new tool. Talking to some of your earlier points, we are able to provide context and show that the majority of employees aren't abusing the system. We now have the ability to figure out where there are people with patterns of behavior that does not look, it looks a little suspicious. We want to go back and address those people specifically, as opposed to taking one big sledgehammer to, the entire corporation and trying to implement that change.
And to you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I'm prepared to do it today, and we can do it as a pilot, just to evaluate it after a year. I think we owe it to the public to do it. To not do it, I think, is almost endorsing the status quo, and we're spending too much time evaluating rather than taking action to try to prevent it. So I will be moving.
I totally agree. We're in a position right now where it's analysis paralysis almost. There's so much data.
It's like Bernie Morelli used to always say, former Councilor Bernie Morelli, he said it's almost like sometimes we complicate things so much that we try to use our right hand to scratch our left ear. At the end of the day, I think a lot of these are very practical types of initiatives that we can evaluate upon it being implemented. And through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, we know what the problem is. Now we need a plan of action. The other component, and as I mentioned, I'll move that accordingly. The other component is related to the incentives. Could we evaluate ways, once we see those savings, so let's say we see savings in a year, in having the sharing of that savings somehow to those that are not abusing. I think for the vast majority, they deserve something for the fact that they're being held accountable and they're not abusing the system. So it's something that we can develop, study, formulate, whatever it needs, to try to create an incentive for them. I think not only bonuses or benefits those that are not abusing it, but it might encourage those that are or on the cusp to not abuse it. And I think that is more of a preventative initiative. So at the appropriate time, I'll move that as well. And that's about it, I think, for now. And I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And both of those will be seconded by Councillor Collins at the appropriate
Okay, so you're putting both motions on? Maybe. Okay, I'll come back to you then, Councillor Marula. I'll go through the speakers list and we'll come back and recognize your two motions. Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you very much. And Zachary, thank you very much for this. Finally, it's almost like I've been waiting I've been asking every year for the last 3 years, and I really appreciate the data that you've brought forward. I just want to be clear right now that, in my opinion, this is not a union issue or a non-union issue. This is a corporation issue. And I'm on board I'm not on board, sorry, for all those martyrs that show up and infect the rest of the office with their illnesses either, because I've often said to somebody who's hacking and sneezing all over my desk, go home, get out of here. I don't want to be infected. So yeah, get lost. So Zachary, can you please go to slide number 9 for me, please? I'm gonna ask you questions about your presentation, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Pound salt.
Yes.
Now, up here at the top, 2013, sick cost was $12,307,940.58.
That's right.
And that's the total sick cost, and that's just those that are off, not coverages, not those they bring in for temps. Can you go to, this is where my confusion is. Can you please go to slide number 15? And on the second bullet point, you put down at a cost of 3.4. So can you just explain the difference between that $12,307,945 to $3.4 million?
Yeah, through the Deputy Mayor, still getting used to this, sorry. In page 7 of the report, sorry, I don't have a slide for this.
Got it here, yeah.
But in the shaded boxes, if you add those up, that will bring you up to $12,307,000. The 9.1, the 371 in modified, the $500,000 in maternity, the 2.2 from the local, and the 29,000 from crossing guards.
So the 12 million is the total?
Is the total of all short-term disability.
Okay, thank you. Can you go to slide number 13 for me, please? It says at the bottom, excludes library, HECFI, and police. If all else, and I understand the two, why library is excluded?
The boards and agencies, they've always been excluded from absenteeism reporting, so this is just standard.
Thank you for that. And give me a second, I've got notes all over here. There's some employees that can still bank their sick time, excluding fire right now. There's still some under the grandparenting in scenario, they still allowed to bank their sick time?
Yeah, through you, Deputy Mayor, going back to the income protection plan definitions here. So the older plans for employees that would be here with years of service in the 30s maybe, they would have been in a program at one point where they were accumulating sick bank. And now with the current IPP program, new employees would start with 130 days of short-term disability coverage that would be given at 66%. And as their years of service grows, it converts into 100%. Part of that IPP plan, after a number of occurrences, we don't pay certain days as penalties. So if it's your 4th occurrence in the year, we don't pay that day. If you're one of the employees with these older years of service, you could use one of your old sick bank days to cover that day. Otherwise, this remains around until the employee is retiring.
So we're still just at about 10% of those right now, correct?
It's a very small, the crossing guards represent 5%. They only have sick time. They contributed $30,000 in sick costs last year. All of that is from old sick bank programs. The actual amount for IPP employees is going to say less than $500,000. It's not very much.
Okay, thank you very much. You did touch on it a little bit. We understand that the fire department, as per the contract, that they are allowed to bank their sick days continuing. They're not grandparented in. This is just all new recruits, everyone coming in. Have you been able to, and this was a question that I actually asked the deputy chief, have you been able to understand that since the 24-hour shift has come in, has absenteeism risen, or has it been at bay, or has it lowered? Good morning, Chief.
Good morning, Council, and through Madam Deputy through to Council. What we have determined in our analysis since the pilot 24-hour shift came in is that up until this most recent year, we have experienced some modest improvements in terms of our absenteeism, in terms of sick leave.
I'm sorry, vast improvements?
No, modest improvements in that regard.
Okay.
Some of the many other performance metrics relative to the 24-hour shift, we have experienced significant improvements in other areas such as inspection and service and so forth. But up until most recently, things were going in the right direction with respect to our attendance numbers. Obviously, as you know, most recently when we just received our 2013 year ends, that's not the case. So in answer to your question, things were moving in the right direction, and most recently, obviously, we have an anomaly in our hands at this juncture.
Okay, thank you for that, Chief, and through you, Deputy Mayor, to the Chief again. Can you pinpoint the time frame when we started to see the decline or the increase in nominally?
I would offer through Madam Deputy that it would be the latter stages of 2013. We're getting our quarterly numbers, and again, things were not showing of any significant jumps until we got to year end and we realized that we've had some. As I previously mentioned, we have other performance metrics relative to, as I mentioned, in-service inspections, a number of initiatives, and that those numbers were all very favorable. Mm-hmm. There was an expectation, for example, after 2.5 years, one of the things that our analysis indicated was doing a 3-year pilot project, that when we were going to have to make a recommendation to council after approximately 2.5 years, mm-hmm. We didn't believe that we had enough really substantial data to provide a recommendation. While the association had a view that perhaps that the 24-hour shift should be codified in the collective agreement, I had a different view. I believe that, and you'll have a report before council in the weeks to come, was that because of the inconclusiveness of the data or the lack of in terms of consistency, I wanted to be able to come back and have a different recommendation to council to continue on and to examine that. And clearly this is something that one of my concerns would be is I want the consistency factor to ensure that the anticipated benefits that were identified prior to my arrival here have in fact been delivered upon. So we've been continuing to monitor that, but clearly on this particular area here, this past the latter stages of 2013, obviously is not consistent with what our experience had been for the first 30 months after the pilot began.
And just in support of those comments as well, I mean, when we look at the analysis, it has been modest improvement since they moved to 24-hour shifts. We're working on a bunch of measures too that we're not bringing forward yet, but percentage of staff that take 0 sick time in the year, the city average was 27%. For fire before 24 hours, it was around 7 or 8%, and has moved up to about 15% from the 24-hour
Thank you for
shifts.
that, Zachary, and through you, Deputy Mayor, to the Chief. So what you're saying, Chief, the pilot project that was probably, if all went well, it would be coming to an end soon. You may be asking, you're probably going to finalize all your comments later, but this pilot project may continue on, because that was one of my questions. How long does this pilot project last?
Well, certainly, and working with our colleagues in Human Resources and Return to Work, and working with our general manager and city manager, we are turning our minds to this because clearly this isn't acceptable, and we need to identify, and this is where we welcome and appreciate the business intelligence tools that we have today. We are able to do a deep dive in some of these things today, which we have not been able to do in the past. So I'll preface my comments by saying I'll wait until we'll be able to do further analysis so we can come up with a strategy or identify our path forward.
Okay, thank you for that, Chief. And one last thing, and Zachary, your Chief, can answer this. We were just talking initially about doctor's notes and maybe bringing it down to 3. When you consider that a 24-hour shift is really 3 days worth of work, do they bring in a doctor's note when?
We routinely request doctor's notes and that, and some of the questions that have been mentioned around the council table in terms of we look at things such as the time in which sick leave has been taken, i.e. going into a weekend at the coming off of like a protracted period. So we look at that, and I subscribe to the comments that both Zach and Helen made in terms of when we're too prescriptive in terms of what's the trigger mechanism, then I think that's a problem. I believe that, we need to be prudent and consistent in how we apply it, but I believe that one of my roles is to be very vigilant and to have the autonomy to call for those doctor's notes when it's, when we believe it's...
When you see that pattern.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you for that. And I'm particularly interested in 24-hour shifts, by the way, because of when it was shifted over at U.S. Steel, which was Stelco at the time. It was interesting to see how the absenteeism was, so that's why I was asking. Zach, on page 9 of 13, there's a modified sick absence from 2007 to 2013. In 2007, there were 4,054 employees that were eligible. In 2013, there was 4,355 eligible. So when you go into the amount of sick days, do we have that broken down to percents? And not just 6 days. What's the percent of the employees that have the 126 and the 219?
Oh, we could do that for a next council report.
That
Definitely convert these to percentages.
Yep, that would be great, thank you. And these ones are answered. Sorry, when I've given two reports, I'm trying to amalgamate the two of them. Okay, so on page 21, or slide 21, and this is really a question for our city manager. On the second bulletin point, they do analysis over 3 years to identify the employees who consistently have high incidental absenteeism or specific patterns. Then what? What happens after that? And the same question for HR, identified for general managers, those employees who have taken it on an average of 9 or more incidental days over 3 years for appropriate follow-up. I guess what I'm asking is, what's the plan?
Well, this is where I think Helen was mentioning about having those difficult conversations with staff that are, displaying this kind of pattern of behavior where, we're concerned that, the reasons for being off aren't legitimate. So it's expected that general managers, directors, managers, and so on that are alerted to these kinds of patterns of behavior are going and having meetings with the staff to point out what we're noticing. And as I think was pointed out in this presentation, we have 7 years of data that now we can look back and see how long this pattern has been persistent. And so my expectation, and it's been communicated to SMT, and in fact we're training on it now, is to sit down with staff and point out the problem and have it rectified.
And thank you for that. And the next slide over, it says we can identify employees with history of high incidental absences and ask for a medical claim form from the first day of absence.
Correct.
Is this a judgmental call? Is this subjective? Is it just up to who?
Through you, Madam Chairman, it is a judgment call, but it's a judgment based on evidence. So, at the end of the day, I don't see it as subjective. I see it based on a pattern, and that pattern will then trigger management to start to question that employee more and require them to issue or to bring in a note verifying why they're away. So, it's, these systems at the end of the day, our benefits are a privilege. I think, and that you don't want to abuse a privilege. And when people are caught taking advantage of a system that treats people fairly, then they need to be held accountable. And more importantly, I think with the tool that we have now to better understand what people are doing, it holds management accountable for having those conversations and asking for those notes whenever we need them. Because I want to treat, and I think as was said earlier in this presentation, this is really about sending a message to all those in the organization that don't play games, that are, when they're homesick, they're sick, and that, we treat them fairly. That's what I really see this thing doing. And it is about accountability, but it is about managing the culture of this organization so that staff, that see that, that rare person in the organization that plays games knows that we now are onto it and that we're going to do something about it.
Thank you for that. And Chris, I still want to reemphasize that the majority of our employees are not taking advantage of this. It's those majority that are, they've got hardship now created for them because their colleague is yet sick again. And one last question for you, Zachary. There was some talk earlier about taking the doctor's note and putting it down to 3 days, and this was really to target the Monday, Friday. Can a weekend be considered a day of work? If I take the Friday off, I take the Monday off, am I theoretically off 2 days now, or am I off 3 days?
Through the Deputy Mayor. It's a really interesting question. It's a good puzzle for BI to solve. Right now, with the PeopleSoft system and the BI technology, there is a limit to which areas we can really drill down to, as opposed to some parts of the organization where we have Kronos or other tools that really provide low-level tracking. Even without that detail, though, we can infer that these employees work 7-hour shifts Monday to Friday. We know where they are, and I think in the one slide, when we talked about drilling down, we're breaking the absence actually into the months that they occur as well. So we're really getting quite detailed. We're really getting very specific in this analysis. I think the other thing with BI too that kind of applies here is matching it up against calendars and events.
Okay.
This is the year that we had bird flu. This is the year that we had avian flu. These patterns make sense. These ones don't. There's nothing going on here except the Super Bowl, and there's a correlation with higher absenteeism. We need to focus on that. You take the past winter, though, and we're seeing, right across the board, all departments, all absenteeism in the incidental categories going up. That lends itself more to, a pattern that you can accept.
Okay, and just to finish off and to clarify, doctor's note for 3 days, that's 3 business days, 3 days they were to be at work, so weekends would not be included for some of those who don't work weekends. So the Friday, Monday absenteeism would not fall under that 3-day doctor's note, correct?
Correct, and that's part of the design there that really works well is the recovery for those absenteeisms. If you're sick for 5 days, whether you started on a Friday or a Wednesday or Monday, you're sick for the standard employee that's working 7-hour days. They've got 7 calendar days to recover. So if they're still sick after that, it is a much more significant type of problem. And just a quick point on that too.
Yeah.
When we look at the trend after the 6th day, we don't see a big swelling on either side. The chart that showed the incidental days, go through this management plan. The majority of our incidental time, occurrence-wise, there's 69-70% of our shifts are 1 or 2 days or less. It's only 7%. The blue bars there are dropping off as we get closer, as you go down, and that trend, continues all the way up to 130 days.
Right. Thank you very much, Zach. This is wonderful information. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Clark, then Councillor Collins.
Thank you. With regards to the income protection plan and the STD, short-term disability plan, do we have the total liability numbers for those banks?
I think finance would probably be the best person to answer that question.
Madam Chair?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, in October of 13, I believe Councillor Clark requested at AFNA a report with respect to our sick bank liabilities, and we provided that report. But just to remind committee, the liabilities are again focused primarily on police and fire. The liabilities for police was approximately $19.3 million, for fire approximately $15.8 million. There are reserves. Police has a reserve balance of approximately $5.5 million, and fire approximately $2.8 million. In the case of police, they do budget for sick bank. In 2013, they budget just over $1 million, and their actuals were $1.6 million. Fire we introduced a budget in 2014 of $360,000. There was no budget prior to that. The recommendation was from staff was to phase that in over 5 years. In 2013, the actuals were $1.8 million for fire.
Okay, so we have a total liability of 19.3 and 15.8 respectively for police and fire, and they have reserves, 5.5, 2.8, and we're now banking, let me rephrase that, we're now budgeting for the annual banking amount for both of those accounts to those reserves?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, in the case of fire, as it falls within a city department, staff recommended a budget increase of $360,000 in 2014, and the recommendation was to phase that in over 5 years to match the 2013 actual. So $360,000 each and every year for a 5-year period, again to align to our 2013 actuals. In the case of police, again, they do have a budget of just greater than $1 million, and their 2013 actuals were $1.6 million. I'm not aware if police increased their budget in 2014 as it relates to sick bank. Again, that would be a discussion between Hamilton Police Services and their board.
But that's not, we're not privileged to have that information?
For you, Madam Deputy Mayor, we requested the information for 2013 for a report. We can request the information again. I'm just not privy to whether or not they increased it in 2014 as part of their budget submission.
Thank you. So that deals with police and fire. With regards to the rest of the city employees, there must be a liability there for sick days or income protection.
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, as the presentation today highlighted, those employees are no longer accumulating sick bank. Our reserve balance, the liability is 75% funded, and therefore staff were not recommending increasing the budget for sick bank any further in 2014. It was just as relates to fire that staff recommended for 2014, and for each and every year for the next 4 years, that that liability be addressed through an increase in the budget.
And you said that the city was 75% funded, so what was that liability for the remaining city employees? Do you remember?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I don't recall the exact number. I can provide that number. It's much smaller than police and fire, and again, as the Councillor Clark identified, it is 75% funded in terms of the reserve balance.
And those liabilities are now on our book showing as a liability in the future?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, all of these liabilities are reflected in the city's financial statements.
Okay, so with regards to our annual, what was it, 11 million, 13, 12 million? So that's our cost right now annually for sick time. Do we have, we're not banking now, Mr. Zagaric?
For you, Madam Deputy Mayor, in the case of police and fire, yes. In the case of the other employees, no. They're no longer accumulating the sick.
So of that 12 million, do we know what we're banking for the police? I'm just trying to get I'm sorry, but I'm trying to actually understand the total impact for the city, not just on the annual basis, but if police and fire are banking a certain amount each year, and then they have specific sick time, the city's getting hit on both ends. Okay, one of it is an incentive to encourage people to work and not take the sick time, and then on the other side, we're getting hit with the sick time. So I'm trying to understand the real economics of the issue just versus the average sick time. So perhaps we'll need to get that information from Mr. Zagaric at a future date.
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, if I understand what Councillor Clark is trying to identify some of that trending. So for instance, around occurrences, are these individuals with sick bank time, are they utilizing that sick bank time, or is that liability increasing? Are they not utilizing the sick bank time and therefore they would be eligible for a payout at the end of their employment with the city, either through retirement or termination. We could look at the trending as it relates to the sick bank liability.
And I'm hoping that the new technology would enable us to do that, because you can imagine if I've got a certain amount of money sitting there for me for, in essence, a gratuity from sick banking, and I can find a way to be off sick without taking that sick bank time, that's not quite consistent with what the policies are of the city. And right now, I can't confirm one way or the other whether or not that's happening. Will your system be able to assist us in that regard?
Yes, so through the Deputy Mayor, I believe we could go back and gather that data and then incorporate it into the model. So you get a picture of, what are the people accumulating as they go, what's actually being used for sick time, and what's continuing to be a liability.
We could compare what's being used out of the sick bank versus the actual true numbers of sick time.
The liability that we're carrying.
Okay, that would be very important, and I guess we could give direction on that. I know Mr. Zagaric has the other direction, so perhaps we can get the two working together to actually give us those numbers. I also read in the report an attendance support program. Really not sure what that exactly means.
So through you, Deputy Mayor, this is the program where HR monitors the frequency of occurrences and the numbers of days of absence. And when an employee reaches 4 occurrences or 7 days of absence in a 12-month period, they trigger into the attendance support program, and the supervisors are required to have a meeting with the employee to discuss their absenteeism, how it is outside of the norm for their area, and what can we do to support you to be at work. And they go through a number of levels in the attendance support program until they get back on a regular pattern of attendance.
So I'm trying to paraphrase. So an employee chooses not to attend work for whatever reasons, and this program, it would be disparaging to say we're holding their hand to get them to come to work? If they either want to work for the city or they don't. So if they're showing attendance issues, then why are we spending money trying to keep them? Because there are thousands of other people in Hamilton that would love to work here and be in attendance.
So through you, Madam Chair, this is intended to be a support program. So issues do come up in these meetings where employees may not acknowledge that they have a problem, and with their conversations with their supervisor, they recognize, yes, I have an issue that I need to deal with. So there's a variety of issues that come up in the meetings, some of which are easier to correct, and others may be dealing with issues of mental health, other stress-related issues on the home front, need for more flexibility in their work, may have an abusive situation on the home front, may have an addiction that they haven't acknowledged. There's a variety of things that come up through those conversations where the employer provides some support and guidance to the employee.
Okay, and I'm still trying to understand, because I would argue that just about everyone that has a job somewhere has issues outside of the job place that makes it challenging some days to go to work. So why are we holding their hands if they're not showing up and we've warned them and they're still not showing up, and we've warned them and they're still not showing up? Why are they still working for us?
Through you, Madam Chair, we do have an obligation in terms of human rights and people who have disabilities in the workplace to accommodate them, and this is one of our processes.
I'm sorry, I'm not talking about disability, and disability was not brought up in my question or in the original answer. I'm talking about we've got people who are chronically not working, they're taking days off, we know they're taking days off, and instead of warning them and saying, listen, you must be in attendance, and following up, and you must be, we're coddling as opposed to saying, hey, that's it. You've taken enough. We've got other people that want to work here and be here.
So through you, Madam Chair, if it is a situation where it's believed to be culpable, absenteeism that the employee does have control over, then we take a different course of action, and it goes down the labor relations and disciplinary route.
And is there any way in your system, Zach, that we can actually get the number of where we have deemed these incidents to be culpable and there was termination?
So
I guess we're almost talking about two different things, because where the BI tool's at right now, we're looking at patterns of behavior that are questionable, and then going back to those, evaluating them, understanding, there's some very legitimate cases in there. There's other cases where we were unaware of these people, and it's highlighting those people for the first time. We haven't expanded the BI technology into other areas of HR yet to look at turnover or grievances, but I think your question right now would be more closely addressed by the LR group.
So I could ask Laura if she wants to add to it, but I can tell you that in 2013, we did terminate 8 individuals in the organization who were terminated due to absenteeism. And, when we do terminate an individual and it gets grieved and it's taken to arbitration, the first thing the arbitrator will look at is what did the employer do to support this employee's attendance at work. So, because 9 times out of 10, these are individuals who do have an illness and a disability. It's classified as a disability. And it's our obligation to support them to be at work.
9 times out of 10, do people have a disability or a mental illness, and that's why they're not at work?
Through you, Madam Chair, it's a variety. It's a variety of
That's what you
issues.
said.
Yeah.
But 9 times out of 10.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say that. If that's what I said, 9 times out of 10.
Okay,
there were 8.
So can I ask Laura then, how are we dealing with the folks who are perpetually not in attendance? We know there's an issue. The managers know there is an issue. Why are we just allowing them to continue working as an employee and tolerating it? Because this goes exactly to what Councilor Marula had stated in the beginning. It's about all the employees, the 80% who work their shifts without fail, that are punctual, that do their job, they go home and they're proud of working for the city. And then you have 20% that, for a variety of reasons, are not in attendance. So if we need an attendance support program, I don't understand that.
So through you, Madam Chair, I think there's an important distinction to be made between the attendance support program, which is intended to be a supportive program dealing with the medical-related issues, and then the non-attendance support program issues, which are essentially culpable absenteeism and then frustration of employment contract. And those are the distinctions we make even in our training programs. When there are culpable or frustration of contract issues, we deal with them separate and apart from the program. And we deal with it through the grievance process, and we deal with it through a disciplinary process. I think it's important to make that distinction, and we manage it accordingly. Oftentimes, issues are raised during these meetings throughout as a result of the attendance support program that help us make that distinction. And at that point, we take it out of the program and we deal with it as a disciplinary issue and separate it from the medical to protect ourselves from any related exposures.
So what I'm hearing is the attendance support program is for people who have more significant health issues, and it's not for incidental absenteeism?
Through you, Madam Chair, the attendance support program is for all medical-related issues. If it's medical, then we deal with it through the attendance support program. If it's non-medical, or if it's due to culpable absenteeism or frustration of employment contract, or to Helen's point, to absences that are within the control of the employee, then we take it out of the program and we deal with it as a disciplinary issue.
Okay, and I guess the challenge that I have is when I'm reading through the report, I can't find how we actually end up dealing with it through the disciplinary issue. Because on this program here, ASP, it actually talks specifically about significant incidental illnesses, occurrences of 4 occasions, or days lost that exceed 7 in a 12-month period. So what's the program in terms of those that we're trying to get to that are deliberately not going to work and that are taking the long weekends. How are we dealing with that?
Through you, or through the Deputy Mayor too. The attendance support program, like Laura said, is for all absenteeism, whether it's incidental or significant. And if you imagine the scenario where an employee didn't take any sick time for a number of years and then had some illness and was off for more than 7 days, they would trigger into that absenteeism program in the past. So that program's picking up a lot of people that are in very reasonable situations and others that may be abusing the system. The business intelligence technology really allows us to come at it from a different perspective, to separate out the maternity-related illnesses, the illnesses that are, because of modified, the significant illnesses that are medically documented and return to work services are managing. And with the one particular example we're talking about is looking at 3-year trends of incidental behavior. So in that group, we're finding some situations of employees that are not triggering into the absenteeism management program. They're falling just below that 7-year average, and we want to identify those as well.
So, one last question then. I'm reading through this report, and so far I've been able to identify WSIB issues, long-term disability issues, work accommodation measurements, your action plans. We've dealt with maternity-related, and it would appear that based on everything in here, there was all legitimate illness. But that's not what we're hearing anecdotally. So I'm trying to see in this report, where is it that the people are taking time off and they're not sick? Because everything in here points to an illness.
So through the Deputy Mayor.
Mr. Murray wants to jump in on this. Chris?
If I can, through you, Madam Chairman, I understand exactly where I think Councillor Clark is going and exactly what he's saying. I mean, at the end of the day, the people in the organization that are clearly abusing the system, how are you identifying them? Are you identifying them, and what are you doing about it? I mean, that is in essence what...
Excellent paraphrasing.
That's what you want. I think what we're saying here today is that, not everyone is sick, however you define sick, whether they're taking a day off, 7 days off, or 107 days off. I mean, the ones that are taking 7 days off or 6 days off or more, they have to have a note. They absolutely, I mean, you can't find yourself in that system without a note, someone verifying that you're sick. It's the ones that are taking 3-4 days off 4 or 5 times a year. It's like, well, wait a minute here. You're not required to have a note, but maybe you're playing a game here. And what is staff doing about that? Because I think your fear is that we're, these are these soft, little conversations that we are having with people and just kind of coddling them. And whereas, it's maybe bloody well true that, this is a game that's being played. This is padding their vacation. This is doing all the things that would concern a member of council, a member of staff, the community. We absolutely need to take those people and are taking those people aside, and we're pointing out the fact that this is not an illness, this is a game, and then they are finding themselves going down a path. Now, whether that was as clear as it needs to be or as I'm saying it right now, but I can tell you that we do hit a fork in the road in which it's no longer a matter of illness. However you define it, it is a matter of culpable behavior in which then they find themselves dealing with Laura. And then having to deal with the fact that they're either getting days off without pay because that's the penalty that's being applied, or in fact they're being terminated. And so that becomes certainly a judgment call for our LR people. I wouldn't want you, Councillor, or any person in this room or listening in or in this community to believe that we are turning a blind eye to people that are playing games. We have a tool now that allows us to go right at them, identify who they are, and I am expecting the management of this organization, who has responsibilities for those staff, to be having those conversations and dealing with people accordingly. I mean, that we need to get value for our money, and that is clearly why we are talking to you today. This is why we have this tool in front of us. There's no way we're going to have a tool like this and not use it effectively.
So to clarify, Mr. Murray, through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, it's your intention and SMT's intention that this tool here is eventually going to identify those individuals who have been abusing the system. Because what I heard earlier was that that was not the intent.
Well, no, I think Zach sort of said it in passing, it's the person that's taking the Monday off after Super Bowl, and it's the games. This tool is going to, and I think I said it, in fact, back in February, before today, I said, we now have a tool that can certainly support people who are legitimately off sick, and we can certainly use the tool to identify those people that are playing games and that there will be action taken. Absolutely, this tool will allow us to identify a pattern of behavior over the last 7 years that some of our employees have engaged in that will now allow us to take them and sit them down, put the evidence in front of them and saying, please explain the following to us, what is going on, because the pattern looks very suspicious to us and we have some major concerns. This tool allows us to do that.
Thank you. I look forward to it.
Thank you. I have Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Madam Chairman, and through you to Zach. Zach, can you take us to slide 10? I think essentially what we want to get at is the, obviously, employee D, which seems to be the focus here today. And maybe what's a little bit concerning about the discussion is it sounds like we have already the system in place, the tools in place to deal with employees who would fall into the category of the employee D scenario. And the question I would have, again, I think Mr. Murray just answered it, though, in terms of, I think what I heard you say during your presentation is that you're preparing a list of employees for managers and supervisors to deal with the employee Ds.
So through the Deputy Mayor, I just changed the tense on that. Like, the lists have already been prepared. We were already distributing this information. These things are going out. Return to Work Services has also been checking these lists, verifying, these are the employees that we're aware of. These are the situations we know are legitimate. These are the employees that have, for whatever reason, not come to our attention yet and definitely need, immediate action from management. So that's already happening. And then beside that, this 3-year trend is a pattern that we felt was a good match for questionable behavior, but we're continuing to investigate additional dimensions in the models, looking for other behaviors that are questionable.
And I think the system that you have in place now clearly identifies those individuals, and maybe that's something we didn't have at our fingertips before. Fair enough. However, I thought I heard through the presentation is that you have the ability right now to deal with the high incidental absences, I think is what maybe, Helen, you had termed them as. In terms of, for those people who have a pattern, have established a pattern, you have the ability to ask for the note on day one. But I don't understand that now that we've identified the employee Ds, we're not talking about people who are on maternity leave, we're not talking about people who have heart conditions or suffering through a round of cancer treatments. These are clearly the people that, through all the discussions we have been skewing the averages and would be considered the problems as it relates to attendance. So we have the flexibility right now to say for that employee, if I use employee D, when would we ask that employee under the current circumstances right now to bring in the note?
So if these employees some of these employees will be having significant absences as well as incidental. So some of them are already in the return to work program and are being medically managed. Others will be newly identified and are ones that management will have conversations with the employees. So that's what I know that Dave and his staff have gone through and identified for the general managers, those that are already being managed through return to work.
So how can we monitor that list through you, Madam Chairman? Most of our discussion at committee has been on the average. We've talked about the 11.5 to 10.5 days average per employee for the organization. We've talked in roundabout numbers about it's costing us $12 million a year. You start to do the math, it's almost for every 1 day of absence. There's $1 million cost to the organization. It may not be real numbers, but it's worth service. It's service that has value to it. So we've talked about those high-level ones. Yeah. Now we clearly have a list of employees who we know are the ones that would be considered the problem. Let's take apart all the other. Let's take out all the other issues in terms of the illnesses those people who are suffering from some kind of a substance abuse issue,
Yep.
they're in treatment for that. These are the people who, we've heard the scenarios today. They're calling in and making their 3-day long weekend a 5-day long weekend. They're the person that stays up late to watch Dancing with the Stars and doesn't come in every Thursday morning because he's up very late watching that. And there's a pattern. So you've identified people who have patterns, and now it sounds like we already have a system in place that says that supervisors and managers can effectively deal with those individuals with the system that we have in place, up into possibly leading to dismissal. Somewhere that information is not getting to us at the committee level. I understand now that Zach has a system that will clearly identify that. So the reporting structure now needs to change. I think we need to know by division how many of those individuals, or what is the number? So we didn't hear that today. What is the clear number of those people who fall into that category? And then how do we monitor our progress with those numbers rather than the 11.5, 12 million, which doesn't mean anything from a budget perspective now, because we're not going to impact the maternity numbers. We're not certainly going to call people back to work who have heart conditions or serious illnesses. So I need to know how the reporting mechanism changed, and then how our interaction with you and your staff through committee changes from this point forward, knowing that we have a clear list.
So to your question, through you, Madam Chair, is that we can provide that to you in our subsequent reports. Also through Chris and his senior management team, he will know, his members of management will know how many people are. I think we have identified 72 individuals.
Yes, through the Deputy Mayor. Like in the current analysis we're looking at, it's 3 years of data for incidental only. We're looking at employees with an average of more than 9 days. And there's only 72 employees in the IPP program that fit that profile. So if you think about that, I mean, in that particular situation, and Helen talked about, the 8 employees that were terminated as a result of absence-related problems, there is some action underway to address these issues. With reporting, we can definitely, in the BI tool, now flag all of these employees and look at just that particular group and see how they behave moving forward. So we can come back and say, when we were here for this particular meeting, this was the group of employees we're concerned about. Here's how their behavior is changing or not. But I'd also caution, we want to continue to change the patterns that we're looking for. We don't want to set up a new pattern and then just have employees adapt their behavior. So we're always going to kind of be coming with different analysis and different groups.
If the average across the organization is 3 for those people who would fall into the sort of the mushy middle, they're the average person who might get the cold that you spoke of. They may have something that's come up. They've sprained their ankle at a baseball game and they've taken 1 or 2 days off. Why would we choose that 9 then as the benchmark for those people we'd consider above the average or above the norm?
We're often right now the data is driving some of our boundaries, so we look where there's naturally occurring behaviors, and then when there's a group of outlying employees, that becomes the behavior right now. But we're also learning a lot as we go, and even in those situations, we're finding there's legitimate medical issues that present in the incidental space, like a carpal tunnel. Is a repetitive one that's not going to take you off of work for 130 days. It's going to show up as, small incidental illnesses. So we're not trying to build one perfect, this is the right amount of sick time. We're looking for a number of different scenarios and then matching our behaviors and our solutions to fit those.
And will they be on a divisional basis?
We can certainly bring anything back by a divisional or sectional basis.
Okay, I guess I have no problem supporting what Councillor, I know he's intending to put the motion, but I understand in terms of lowering the average days that are required for the doctor's note, certainly supportive of that, but I think those people who fall into the employee D category are going to find a way to beat the system. We already know that with a system that's, it sounds like it's more strict or stringent than the one we have internally with fire, we require their notes a little earlier and their numbers are the highest in the organization. So that, I think, shows you right there. I'm not certain what the correlation will be. People are going to find a way to beat the system, and the fact that we can now identify who those individuals are, I think is a good thing. However, all the other information, there's a lot of numbers, as Zach said today. It can be very confusing in terms of keeping track. It's that category right there. It's the 72 employees or thereabouts, I think, that we need to follow, because they're the ones that are finding ways and means in which to skew our averages, and they're clearly not the norm in the organization. So I really appreciate the update. I did have the opportunity several months ago to meet with Zach and Helen and Mr. Murray about the computer program, and I really think we need that SWOT analysis in different areas of the organization. There are all kinds of areas where we could start to drill down and use these particular numbers specifically to find budget savings, and that would be my final comment. I would like to know, I think I did ask for that during the budget session. Clearly there's a cost to the organization in terms of lost services. When someone doesn't show up to work, we're living without that service in most cases, unless we backfill or there's overtime. But in other areas, there is an overtime component, and we have someone who needs to come in above and beyond what they're expected to. There is a cost to that, and so I would like to know truly what the cost is. I don't think that 12 million is an accurate figure. It's not above and beyond what our operating budgets would provide, and I think that's the number that we need to know. We need to know the budget variance that's associated with the absences, and so I don't know when you'd be in a position to come back with that. Sounds like you have all the information at your fingertips. It's a matter of just sorting it out.
We're striving for September, right?
We really do want to come back with the next report to address that issue, and use the tool basically to see where our absenteeism by job or by position, and then identify these are the positions that are backfilled, and this is the rate that we backfill them at. And then we can take that information and basically apply it back through our sick data for 7 years and really kind of get a picture of this is what our overtime costs were, this is what our backfill costs were related to absenteeism.
Okay. And I think we still need to change the number. We have a target that we've established internally for our absenteeism. I know that it was 11.5, then 10.5, and internally we've changed that through the committee that we have. I know that we're on par with all the other public sectors. Apparently, I think it was the last report in terms of the nation and the province. But I think the committee's goal, and I don't want to speak on behalf of the entire committee, but the goal and objective at that point in time was to be better than the average. And I think that should still be a goal and an objective that we should put forward at some point in time after we understand how we deal with these 100 problem individuals, if you want to call them that.
So just on that point, through you, Deputy Mayor, we want to separate out targets and goals for different types of absenteeism. So we want to see how far we can push the modified sick time and bringing people back earlier. What can we do around the incidental absenteeism, et cetera. So we want to break it apart.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How much did we pay for this software?
Do you know that?
We don't have the exact numbers for software cost, but this is not a purchase package. This is developed in-house in partnership with our IT group. And some of the technology components that we're using for the BI are being used for other parts of the organization as well. So there's business intelligence programs starting in finance. I think they're also doing some work with fleet and community services. So we share that that cost with them for those core components. And then
You're saying we don't have a cost of if cost recovery, or what's the terminology, chargeback. We don't have a total cost of the development of this package.
we can go back to IT and get you some hard numbers on exactly what we've invested in this.
Okay. I wouldn't mind those numbers. I find it, it's great to be able to do this kind of in-depth analysis, and it's great numbers. I just scratched my head and said, what did they do before they had computers in large corporations? I came from a company that had over 5,000 employees, 7,000 employees, and in a mining industry running 3 mines. And the issue was never at the top. The issue was, what kind of managers do you have? What kind of training do those managers have? And what kind of discretion are those managers exercising to manage absenteeism within their own divisions? So I guess the concern I have is it's not all about them actually having illnesses. It could be, if you did some overlapping of grievances and other thing, it could be just a poor supervisor or a poor manager, and the person had enough and take some time off, and they're not, other than maybe stressed, they're really not ill, but they look for reasons to rationalize why they're off. So there's another piece to this that's not just about sickness, it's about what level of training And we've already identified through Public Works that we have some significant issues in training. So have we done that analysis, and what level of training our management has to deal with these issues?
Okay, I think Mr. Murray wanted to answer that question.
It's a great question, and it's an important point. In fact, we're spending a lot of time now with our whole leadership group on everything from performance accountability to being a better leader, being able to coaching people through how to have difficult conversations that maybe weren't being had before. So it's not just focused on Public Works, it's in fact focused right across the entire corporation. So we are doing all of that, and on top of that, we're bringing forward a succession development plan, as well as all the things that you would expect us to do to make sure that the leaders that we have in the organization are aware of what we expect of them and are properly trained. And further to that, that when we recruit for new leaders, we are looking for very specific traits that they can bring to the table, more than just technical knowledge, but specific characteristics that will enable them to be very effective managers of people. So everything that you're concerned about, that you've witnessed or you've experienced in the private sector that leads to what is ultimately good management, all of that is very much on a front burner in our organization right now, and we're spending considerable time and effort talking to several hundred people about what it is to be a leader.
And I appreciate that, because, this is a very complex issue when you deal with absenteeism. I'm trying to highlight something that no one else has been talking about so far, is that you're only good as the people that you work with, and you're only good as the managers you have above you. And, Chris and I have talked about, the whole congruence of ethics, where frontline workers feel empowered and the ability to have a frank discussion, getting outside of favoritism, which is a huge issue and creates animosity within a division and creates absenteeism. I represented as a grievance chairman for a Stillwater local and a large company. I can tell you that 1 in 5 absentee cases were won by the company. The other 4 were won by the union. It's a very, very tough road to hoe when you get to arbitration, when the company's trying to, they have to really go through all the hoops to show they did everything they could in the context of those employees, which I think I heard suggested earlier. But even further than that, and of course, we had a number of cases where it was just a bad supervisor. The difference is, in those cases, that company either relocated or fired those supervisors through performance management. We promote them. So the issue is, from my perspective, what do we do?
So through the Deputy Mayor, I know Chris wants to answer
I think Mr. Murray wished
on
to
this.
answer that. Thank you, Chris.
Just through your comment, Councillor, I know you and I have talked about this, and you have stated publicly for a number of years the importance of ethics, and you've termed it the congruence of ethics. So just, you'll be pleased to know that our next extended management team meeting, which is basically the entire leadership of the organization, our focus in the morning session is all on ethics, and it extends from the ethics survey that Ann did, but taking it even further so that the organization is clear in its mind as to the importance of ethics, and further to that, the importance of building trust, not just with employees, but with citizens that we serve. So, all these things that you've been saying over the years, we take seriously, and we're actioning them. So that it's not just talk, because we're all tired of talk. It is, concrete steps forward, and then on top of that, expectations that people are going to do something with what they're taught. And you're right, if they don't, and if we're not effective leaders in the organization, then we do have options. And so, you don't always want to manage an organization with a blunt stick. You don't get the results in the long term when you do that. But we are certainly, I think, spending the time and effort to make sure that our corporate culture is taken seriously, and that, we provide better service to people for the money they pay.
And I appreciate that. I know you've had these performance management meetings that have been taking place and so forth with the employees, management, supervisors, which is great. Certainly we're on the right road, but I want to clearly identify when some of the councillors just focus on sick and absenteeism, that it's more complex than just the employee, it's the organization. And I can guarantee you, when you go to divisions that have great managers, you're going to have low absenteeism. You're not going to have that kind of abuse. You have a terrible manager, you're more than likely going to have abuse. The other equation is, and there's the United Nations, the policy white paper, there's between 3 and 5% of people, regardless, that will abuse a system. And whether, with companies or welfare or income tax, it seems always to come out to around the same number, between 3 and 5%. So we know that it's the same pressure that many organizations will have. And the question is, what are we doing to address that 3 to 5% to ensure that we have accountability? Because certainly there's enough taxpayers out there, out of jobs, that are looking to work, and Sea City, Hamilton is a great place to work for, and they'd be glad to fill those voids if, in fact, those abusers aren't fulfilling their responsibility. So I would hope that, I think it was on Councillor Clark's train of discussion, that there are steps, you know what they are, arbitrators have laid them out in regards to chronic absenteeism, that we're taking each of those steps. And we're basically telling people the abuse is not going to be tolerated. We send that message loud and clear, and we do exactly what that threshold is and identified by past arbitrations, and we play it by the letter, and maybe it takes a little longer, but we will get there, and and the message will be sent.
Through the Deputy Mayor, I think you make some really interesting points there. The idea that we should be measuring on more than one measure. And we talked briefly earlier about the percentage of employees with 0 sick time. I mean, it's a different measure to look at in the organization and identify where are the groups that are above that 30 and what's being done differently to encourage that kind of behavior. But also, I mean, BI is just starting in the HR space. We're focused on short-term disability right now. But the real strength of this tool comes when you add in multiple data sources. So when you're looking at absenteeism, grievances, turnover, is the absenteeism in one area better because the employees are just leaving the organization? I mean, that's not the kind of behavior we want to encourage either. So I think excellent points there to the BI tool, and that we really need to be taking more of a holistic approach. And this is the tool that we think can, take us there. We want to get these different reporting tools together in one place and get a complete picture of what's going on. And the other point you briefly touched on, a lot of our conversation today and a lot of the analysis to this point has been focused on the employee. Where are the employees with certain behavior? What's going on? But this tool is also going to allow us to look at different, ways of the org structure, but also, people. Instead of focusing on, the employees with high absenteeism, where are the supervisors that are correlating with high absenteeism? And that's something we haven't gotten into yet, but we're really excited to get into that as well. And once that work's done, applying that across all of these different measures. So fantastic points.
Appreciate it. When I worked, again, in the private sector, I believe the absenteeism target was 3%, which I think equated to like 8 days a year, if I remember right. The number I think you're indicating is it 8 or 9?
I don't think we've picked a target. I keep asking for one that would be acceptable, but I think it's a really difficult thing to pick a target. One, the idea, is that nobody wants to be sick. The other one is, we're going to have to deal with certain situations. They happen, they occur. So trying to get that sense, I think we have to go back and look at what our historical numbers are, look for parts of the organization that are statistically big enough to justify and say, this is the type of thing that we want to see more of, and then take those numbers to other groups and say, can you match that behavior? And constantly driving, constantly moving forward in that respect.
Fair enough, but I'm indicating that the heavy industry, ISO and all those standards, if I remember right, certainly with the Rio Algoma and Denison Mines, it was 3% was the absentee target. So they said anything over this won't be tolerated, and and there was extra levels, and you would be called in and so forth. And I really loved as part of this presentation where you talked about some of the steps you would take in those areas that you have concern. EAP, I mean, there may be some very deep issues, again, whether it's a supervisor, manager, or something else. And I don't think it's intrusive when you have a trend or a concern on absenteeism to introduce that. So I got a different approach than maybe my colleague. I think it's a helpful approach. Again, I want to get rid of abuse, But we still have responsibility, as you know, through human rights and through these arbitration cases, to do everything we can to address that absenteeism. So I think that's an important step in this process when you identify them to engage that EAP component to better understand why that situation exists with that particular individual. So I think that's a very important step, and I congratulate you in identifying that. The other question I was going to ask is the liability, and I guess that's for Mike Zagaric, because there was a question asked earlier, but help me understand. Liability is if the city was to close down tomorrow, what we would have to pay out. Is that not the interpretation of liability?
For you, Madam Deputy Mayor, that's correct. So these are liabilities as it relates to all employees that are currently accumulating sick bank or have in past years accumulated sick bank time. So in terms of the information that I recited earlier, we did look at the annual payouts, and as it relates to police services, the annual payouts we're forecasting for 2013 through 2017 is about 1.6 million. For fire, it's approximately 1.8 million. And to Councillor Clark's previous question about the liability for all other employees is about $1.1 million, and we're expecting annual payouts of about $171,000.
So the reason I asked that question is because, again, that liability is based on if we were shut down tomorrow. So you can't use the same standards as the private sector. I mean, that could happen. I don't suspect any city is going to be shutting down and laying off all their employees. So I believe that there's a different standard that applies to the public sector. For example, police services, I remember looking into this, the reserve for sick pay, I think with only 120,000 or thereabouts, maybe it was 200,000 drawn out of it in the last 4 years. So they're funding it from some mechanism, but they didn't draw a lot out of their sick pay reserve. So, you know, I'm not sure what we're trying to get at that issue, but if you can provide some clarity, that'd be great.
So through the Deputy Mayor, to your kind of question around liability, financial obviously, you know, has a solid grasp on this, but there's a limited amount of resourcing that we can apply to different problems. So we want to focus on the right thing. But if that's a concern, we could definitely, you know, get a team together, a cross-functional team to look at this and better understand where our liability lies in individual years. You know, leverage this BI technology to say this is when we expect those liabilities to actually come home with some data in there. I know Mike wants to follow up on that.
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, where we were very focused on in our October report was in terms of the annual payouts relative to what was budgeted. So to Councillor Whitehead's comment with respect to Hamilton Police Services, Hamilton Police Services does have a reserve balance of just short of $5.5 million with respect to sick bank liabilities. So typically, we would draw on reserves if we budget for sick bank liabilities, we would draw on that annual budget, and in the case where there is a favorable annual variance, year-end variance, staff may recommend to apply a portion of that favorable year-end variance against those liabilities. So again, in terms of that October report, we are very much focused on what the annual payouts were relative to what we were budgeting for sick bank liabilities, and recognizing that we did have some areas, and more specifically fire, where annual payouts were significant in the area of $1.8 million, yet we weren't budgeting for the sick bank liability, and our reserve balance was only $2.8 million relative to a liability of $15.8 million.
Appreciate that, Michael. I just want to not leave the impression that I'm not supportive of the software development, but all in, the taxpayer, this is live stream, this is a public venue, we need to ensure that all the information is out, and everyone, because I don't mind people emailing me and say, well, what about this, what about that? And the only way that they can be informed is all the information is available to the general public. So I think that's important. Second piece is it's a great tool, obviously, to analyze and assess, but I don't want it to take away from the strength of your frontline managers and supervisors. It can't come from just the top. It has to be at the level that's supervising those employees, and that's what I want to put my emphasis on. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor McCaddy, then Councillor Duval, then Councillor Ferguson. I'm just going to remind our colleagues in the ante-room that can hear this that we don't have quorum, and as we approach the end of this, we'll need quorum to move on with motions. Thank you. Councillor McCaddy.
So, Madam Chair, you'd like me to speak slowly so we can get the quorum back? No. No. Okay. Quickly. Okay. Excellent work. I mean, what we need throughout the corporation is the very best information as councillors to make the best decisions, provide the best guidance and direction to staff, and of course make decisions during budget time as well. So this really helps us from that perspective. I wanted to pick up, Madam Chair, on the comment about the aging workforce, and just wondering whether there's we may have already received it previously, but just a reminder maybe, is there a table, a graph that speaks about the trends over the next 5 to 10 years? Because my sense is at some point, we're aging, but at some point a lot of retirements happen, and then all of a sudden we get a whole lot younger. You would hope some of these numbers would positively reflect some of the youth and people that don't have some of the same challenges as some of us who are older. So I'm just wondering, with the aging workforce, if it's full stop there's no sense of any hope on some of these things. But is that going to change? When does that change? Can we get some kind of a document, a graph, a visual that shows how that will change, Madam Deputy Mayor?
So through the Deputy Mayor, definitely. The BI thing's really kind of taking off. There's a great YouTube video, Building Airplanes in the Sky, and if you get a chance to watch it, it's a great metaphor for how things have been going over the last few months. We're always kind of building this BI tool as we go. So we have been implementing a lot of years of service data in just recently, and we really wanted to have that before we went and looked at age, because we think those two need to be presented together, and that's why there's a lot less age-related stuff at this point. So as we come back with the next report, I mean, this is the type of feedback we need to know and where we take this tool. We can point it in a lot of different directions, but definitely want to come back with some more insight on the age of employees, the years of service, how those correlate to different issues, and drive that kind of analysis.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. That's important information for us to have, not only for this purpose we're talking about today, but for planning generally, workforce planning, which we've talked about before. My second question was, there's talk in the report about the occupational health nurse and sort of reaching just a little bit into that person's life who's off sick for a variety of reasons and trying to assist a little bit more. Have we thought about trying to go beyond that, and there will be confidentiality issues as you go down that pathway, but have we looked into going beyond that to talk to family doctors or to broaden the understanding of that person's life and their challenges, and talking about well-being and helping them with exercise programs or something? I think a lot of private corporations do that. In fact, they set up gyms at their places of work, so people over the lunch hour or whatever can go down and work out and become healthier. It's a general thing, I think, with corporations. Madam Deputy Mayor.
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, yes, the healthy workplace and health promotion is very much part of the total offerings of human resources. The occupational health nurse does work with family physicians as well as the return to work specialists when dealing with individuals, but also runs other health screening and health assessment clinics. Managers can invite them into their teams. We have a healthy workplace specialist who's providing all the learning, lunch and learns, and based on the assessment of our healthy Workplace Advisory Committee, which represents the front line and management from across the organization. So there's a number of programs and offerings that are being provided on that vein.
Well, that's also great to hear. I think all throughout the healthcare field, they are doing the same thing. They're focusing on data and prioritizing the number of people that go to emerge, 200 times a year, or of course with our EMS folks, visiting them more often than not. And can we get some more fundamental solutions rather than just chipping away at at people being sick every now and then. So sounds like you're on that, which is great to hear. The last question I have is just best practices, other municipalities or private corporations. Is what we're talking about here in keeping with what's going on elsewhere? And is what's happening in Hamilton extraordinarily bad in terms of our sick time challenges? Or is it similar to other municipalities? You know, you hear a lot about cultural problems in Hamilton in terms of our workforce from a variety of reasons. How alarmed should we be about what we're learning even more, because you've got better data than you ever have before compared to our comparators, even private corporations, Madam Deputy Mayor?
So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, very good question. As we've been trying to really understand what's going on in our organization and understanding the data that people keep on their employees, have had extensive conversations with other HR directors and return to work and health and safety managers in other municipalities. We're the only ones that are doing this kind of analysis. Most everyone is looking at the big number. And when we started drilling down and understanding that number, I mean, actually, Hamilton performs well, either in the midpoint or below. And we have all of the employee groups that typically drive the absenteeism in organizations. So they're your fire, paramedics, lodges, ATU. Those are typically the employee groups that have the highest absenteeism, and we fare pretty well. But the challenge is that we're not comparing apples to oranges, because every municipality has different programs and they have different ways they count these numbers. So we are much better, you know, we're interested in benchmarking practices that are effective in other organizations, what's working for them, but we really want to benchmark against ourselves. We have really good data now, and we'd like to see how we can progress with our own data. There's so many variables that you can't control for when you start going out and looking at other municipalities and private sector. Different benefit programs drives absenteeism differently.
Thank you. Councillor Duval, last speaker on the list. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And Zach and Alan, this is an excellent report. This has really narrowed it down. We're on the right track, and there was a lot more data to get and information. But it's better than the previous reports when there was an average of 11 and a half days and the public went wild and the media was trying to expose something when it really didn't have all the facts. And then the employee at the city of Hamilton was feeling bad because he was being painted with a black brush that he was abusing a system. So I think you're off to a great start of narrowing it down and try to get to some bad apples, and it's in every workforce. But when I see the 3.3, an average of 3.38 days, I mean, that's the norm even in the private industry. And actually, it might even be a little bit better of the majority of the workforce. But under 20%, I got to ask some questions. First of all, is this all in for the total workforce in the city of Hamilton?
The Pareto curve, it is.
Or is it?
Sorry, on this one here?
So what I'm saying is all of people, union and non-union?
Yes,
Correct.
everyone.
All people.
And significant and incidental as well.
And IPP and sick bank, everyone.
Okay, have we broken it down to unionized staff and non-union staff?
We have.
Yeah, through the Deputy Mayor, in Appendix A, I believe we've included a little bit of data about union versus non-union for incidental absenteeism. And just point out that, you know, the head count between those two groups is very different.
Okay.
We could obviously come back with future reporting too that's more specific in that area.
So what I'm trying to point out here, Zach, is in that 20%, what we find it's high on that 40 days. Obviously, there's many reasons. It could be surgery, it could be anything. If somebody has developed an illness all of a sudden, it could be anything. But and the labor laws have changed. The Employment Standards Act have changed. So in those absences, is the Ontario Family Medical Leave included in that? So if somebody wants to go off, are we counting that, or do we know of that?
Emergency.
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, no, we're not capturing anything here but STD. We have had conversations about looking at other types of leave, other types of absences, emergency leave, etc. And we were just so, trying to get the data right on the STD first. We haven't gone into those other areas.
Okay. Now, on the personal emergency days that a person is allowed off, how many days are they allowed off under the ESA Act?
It's 10. 10.
10, I believe that's correct, too. So do we, if a person uses, let me put it to you this way, the doctor's certificates that we require after a certain amount of time, is it policy that we do for after 6 days, or is it contractual?
Through you, Madam Chair, it is both.
Okay.
It's both in the collective agreements and in our corporate policy for non-union.
Okay, and if a person was put on the NOTE program for some type of disciplinary reasons or being watched, can you shorten that period? Is there language there that you can shorten that period upon request?
Through you, Madam Chair, and I'm looking at Laura to correct me if I'm wrong, but there is language in the collective agreement that we can ask. And indeed, after the last time we were before you with your management action plan, Laura did meet with all of the unions to discuss this program, and they're aware of our ability to do that.
Okay. So under the personal emergency leave that we have under DSA, is that included in those figures? Or would we know?
Through you, this would be strictly those situations where people have called in sick and they've been coded into PeopleSoft as a sick absence. I'm looking at Dave to confirm that that's the case.
Yes, through you, Deputy Mayor. So that is the case with the emergency leave days. Those are unpaid days as well. So this just captures sick paid days in our system.
So we wouldn't know that if it was an emergency under the person, because the person automatically gets paid. Is that correct? So if I was an employee and I phoned in that day and say, you know what, I got an emergency appointment here, I did something wrong, I'd be off, I would be paid for that day. Correct?
Through the Deputy Mayor, the employee wouldn't be paid for an emergency day if it's a non-paid situation.
I know that if I didn't use the emergency day under the ESA Act, if I'd known just under my contract, would I be paid?
So,
if I phoned in sick.
So Laura's coming down to respond to this question, Councillor.
Sorry, through you, Madam Deputy Mayor. The employee would get paid under the income protection plan, provided that they reported a sick leave absence.
Okay.
They would not be required to provide a doctor's note at that point in time.
Okay. Do we know of employees that might have other emergencies in the family? Could be anything, a daughter having an appointment, called in sick. Would he be paid for that day?
So through you, Madam Chair, if the employee reported that he or she was off sick, they would get paid for that day. We have no way of knowing if they're off because of a sick family member.
Right. Okay. So through Madam Chair, so only if we ask those pertinent questions would we know to get that type of data to get in there. Is that correct?
That would be correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I think we're doing the right thing. I mean, the whole idea was to find out if we had out of control absenteeism, and it seemed to be. And now we're trying to focus on there, narrowing it down. And it's not all the employees, it's some employees. And some of those are well justified why they're having time off. Some, they're bad apples. And it happens in every workforce. And those are the ones you're trying to concentrate on. But I think on the ones that we're trying to concentrate on, and we got to have supervision that's going to be telling them, you know, they go under a doctor's note program and they're well aware of it under their yearly review. I know that's all we do in the private sector. They take over the average. If you're above the average and you have no justification, then you're put on a doctor's note program for a year and they reevaluate you. So anytime that you're off, you must be under a doctor's care to be off, to be justified. You can't say I'm sick and then 3 days later go and see a doctor. that's not justified because somebody has to give you that okay to be off. So it's just some points that we should be looking at maybe, because I think we all want a great, healthy workforce and not to be blamed when somebody else is doing something that we're all painted with the same brush. So I say good work, keep on the great track, and thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to turn now to Councillor Marula for your motion, sir. Motions?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Just one motion. I'm going to be discussing with staff the other initiative, but this is moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Collins. The staff be directed to report back on implementing the feasibility of implementing a policy corporate-wide that does not conflict with collective agreements, that employees have a mandatory obligation of providing a doctor's note justifying their absence after 3 days of illness.
Thank you. Moved by yourself, second by Councillor Collins. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Seeing none opposed. And may I now have a motion to receive this staff's presentation? Moved by Councillor Johnson, second by Councillor Ferguson. All in favor? Thank you, everyone. And again, thank you, staff. Excellent, excellent job, everyone. Now, members of committee, the clerk has suggested, because we do have the outside representative coming in for 1 o'clock, whether we should take a break or do you want to keep going and get through this? I'd like to keep going. Is that okay with committee? Thank you. So we're going to move on to discussion items would be next thing, Carolyn, and we'll come back to the in-camera. So members of committee, we have report number 8.1 is the Task Force on Cleanliness and Security in the Downtown. Moved by Councillor Farr, second by Councillor Collins. All in favor? Carried. Thank you, everyone. Members of committee, report 8.2 is the Advisory Committee for Persons with Disabilities. Any questions or comments? Moved by Councillor Murillo, second by Councillor Johnson. All in favor? Carried. And then we have 8.3 is St. Mark's feasibility study. Councillor Farr on that?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you to this term of council and all those many previous councils who've sought out some future use and working hard at it since the purchase for close to $500K in the mid-90s. Madam Deputy Mayor, we did receive this correspondence. I'm not certain if I caught it off the top. Did we receive this correspondence, or can we do that now?
I'll have to ask you the clerk, because I don't recall it being on our blotters. I know it was just on my email that was sent by Janice today.
So through you to the clerk, did everyone receive a copy of this one-pager from the Durand Neighborhood Association?
It's on our emails, but I just...
Should we receive this formally if everyone received a copy, or through you to the clerk?
The clerk's office has not received a copy of that correspondence.
Oh, well, my AA probably gave me a hard copy in addition to the emails everyone else received. So I'll just speak briefly to the contribution of the Durand Neighborhood Association. And actually, well before the City of Hamilton purchased this property, they've been active on St. Mark's file since the late 80s, 88, 89. The Durand, as identified in this correspondence, and everybody had an opportunity hopefully to see it, obviously operates in a deficit. It's the most intense neighborhood in the City of Hamilton, and only limited park space, a 7.16 hectare deficit as identified in this correspondence. They are the most established neighborhood association. I've propped them up before in this venue, and it goes without saying they've been around 43 years. They are looking at promoting what's before us, and they have for some time been looking at a broader community use. And not only that, an opportunity for the Durand Neighborhood Association, as established as they are, they do not have a regular place within the neighborhood, and as dense as the neighborhood is, to meet regularly. Most recently in the participatory budgeting Ward 2 exercise year 2, they've made a commitment and are trying to get on the voting ballot 100K commitment to go towards some capital improvements, and they are also thinking well beyond just this year's participatory budgeting exercise, and they will work hard, I'm sure, at getting all the right support within the neighborhood and frankly within the downtown to get that on the voters list. On page 8 of 11 of the staff report, Madam Deputy Mayor, 1, 2, 3 paragraphs down, the Durand Neighborhood Plan notes that, quote, the importance of maintaining, enhancing, and increasing increasing parks and open spaces should be recognized, end quote, and includes a policy in that council-approved Durand neighborhood plan that, quote, additional public park and recreational facilities will be provided in the neighborhood using property which is readily available where possible, end quote. Well, guess what? In the Durand, believe it or not, there are not a lot of possibilities. This most definitely is one, which brings me back to many thanks to this term of council for committing to the stabilization, which was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that council long ago in the mid-'80s who made the purchase for $400K and change. We've put a lot of expertise and energy into this situation, and certainly like Akhmar in Ward 8, this is a historic, a heritage asset that is owned by the city. And what we have before us today is two recommendations: that St. Mark's Cultural Programming Space Feasibility Study be received, a great piece of work as part of the report, and B, that Tourism and Culture Division staff report back to GIC with a financial and operating plan based on the operating model outlined in the St. Mark's Cultural Programming Space Feasibility Study. A lot of this study had some community engagement and hundreds of people attending St. Mark's when we embarked upon that engagement. But as you know, there's a great deal of history behind St. Mark's and what to do with St. Mark's, and it brought us to this point here today. I have some questions for, I believe, Anna Bradford or Economic Development staff, and through you, I'll just ask a few of them now. First off, with what's before us, will staff be returning to the next council, not this council, but the next elected body, looking for, ultimately, I think it's $2.8 million or in that neighborhood? Through you to Anna?
Through the chair, yes, we will be looking at coming back to you with a solid plan so that we have solid numbers, and we'll be looking for funds in the 2016 capital budget, and it will be a staged project, so it'll go over a couple of years.
We contemplating things, and we've been talking about it lately in a few of these GICs, crowdsourcing through you, Chair?
Through the chair, crowdsourcing, I know that John Hertel is coming back with a report on crowdsourcing, so no, that has not been part of our plan at this point.
You haven't, through the chair, completed a financial or operating plan as part of this feasibility study. If we send this back with the recommendations before us, that I'd be happy to move, Madam Deputy Mayor. Is that what something that obviously we'll look forward to?
Through the chair, yes, that's our next steps.
And in the report, it says, quote, base operating expenses and offsetting revenues would be in the range of 15 to 25K. Does this mean a net loss or a net gain?
That would be for operating, that would be a gain based on similar types of venues that we have in some of the other museums, so wedding revenues, that type of thing. So it's just for the operating, it doesn't cover capital.
And through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, while I have faith that it would be an attraction and that we would see gains, if there were a loss, where would we cover those costs through you, Chair, on operating?
Through the chair, if there were a loss, I think that's something that we're unaware of right now. We don't know. We would have to look at coming back to you with that financial plan so that we could confirm the numbers a lot better.
So on page 45 on the ROM cost estimates for restoration, you've got consulting going on somewhere in the neighborhood of $350K. So what do we get? What sort of bang do we, for our buck, do we get on that through you, Chair?
So through the chair, those types of costs would be things like consulting fees, the design fees, the project management fees, et cetera. So they're based on, I guess, order of magnitude for that type of project.
Okay, and as already referenced, we had a council-approved capital account. What's left in that as it relates to the line item of St. Mark's?
I believe, through the chair, it's about $170,000, $180,000 is left in that account. So that would be the money that we would use to do the financial plan, do the cost estimates for the capital, very definitive so that we know what we're coming back with.
Okay. On the White Hern tie-in, which this council has debated in the past, and which is obviously a very, very short walk, meters away from St. Mark's, we have something called a documented space deficiency there. What is the dollar value of this deficiency? Like lost revenues, Anna, through you, Chair.
Just through the chair, I'm going to hand that over to Ian Kerr-Wilson to answer that. Oh. Through the chair, sorry, he just gave it to me. It's $7,300.
$7,300? So it's about space at White Hern for programming, and there are some great things we do, educational things with students, and in the summertime, one might contemplate it's basically on City Hall property. Why do we not use City Hall for extra space for White Hern?
Through the chair, City Hall is really a place for business. It's for city business. It isn't for programming, school tours, that type of thing, although we do tours for students around civic engagement, that type of thing, but it's not really suitable for doing that type of work.
One thing I think City Hall may be suitable for, Anna, maybe you could speak to this too. The report indicates there's no parking on the site, but kitty corner, quite obviously, we have level 2 City Hall parking. Is that an option relating to that deficit when we contemplate moving forward through you, Chair?
Through the chair, just for clarification, are you saying using parking lots for programming space?
No, using parking lot for parking.
So in the area, there's a lot of parking that's available that could be utilized for St. Mark's.
So back to the Durand Neighborhood Association, you were kind enough some years ago to join us at one of the neighborhood meetings, and we talked about Central School, which is right across the way here to our south, and you look at that beautiful garden. That garden is maintained by members of the Durand community, Elsie and a bunch of others. It's vast, it's beautiful, it's very well maintained. They never slouch on their responsibilities, their commitment to do this for the Board of Education. I'm sure anyone who's come out of our council parking area has noted how gorgeous it is, and certainly the Durand Neighborhood Association has offered up that expertise and offered up members of the community as it relates to ongoing landscaping of St. Mark's, because quite obviously when you contemplate the deficit in park space and how we don't only want to maintain and restore this heritage building, but also make sure we have some aesthetically pleasing lands. Is this something that, that we can continue as we move forward? If we move forward, can we incorporate a partnership with the Durand Neighborhood Association that may simply look at, take care of the landscaping, do the great job you're doing at Central right across the road at St. Mark's, and here's the key for your monthly meetings and a few fundraisers?
Through the chair, in terms of the landscaping, it's a wonderful project that can be done by the neighborhood. We have a very similar program at Field Code in Ancaster, and they do an outstanding job. In terms of a partnership with the Durand Neighborhood Association, that's certainly something that will be part of our plan, and we'll be working with them on that.
In previous debates, I think someone around this table might have asked some good questions about not being in the wedding business, but you've referred to the real opportunity here for St. Mark's. Can you just expand on that, Anna? And though we're not in the wedding business, how this might be advantageous through you, Chair?
So through the chair, there are certain programs that we do that may seem to be outside of the norm. And we have been doing weddings at most of our sites, like Dundurn Castle, Battlefield, Field Code, for over 30 years. These types of revenues help support the other type of programming.
Okay. And we're not looking at an anticipated new full-time equivalent. You're going to utilize existing staff?
Through the chair, yes, that is the plan at this point. Although as we get busier into the future, we will model the same model we have at Field Code, which is facility attendant people. They will be brought in, but they are covered through the rental fee, so it's neutral.
How about, just for the record, some other uses? Maybe we can focus on rehearsal space, musical space. It's a good sized venue. It'll probably have some great acoustics, much like Catherine Street North Studios. And of course, we have our newly established music office and our music committee as well, made up of community stakeholders. Is there a tie-in there?
Through the chair, yes, there is. We were fortunate to have a great conversation with Tim Podesick and brought him over and looked at the space, and he felt that there was great opportunities for that. We'll also be working with Jackie Norton of the music office to ensure that that space is available for people for rentals.
And the maximum capacity was standing room?
Through the chair, it's 330
300?
at
Okay.
standing room, yeah.
And seated at somewhere in the neighborhood of 200, I think? Through you, Chair?
Through the chair, it's 240.
240. Okay, so you're not asking for anything financially here today. You're asking to be part of a future budget process for a future council to deliberate, and that's not too far off in the future. I'm just, it's been a while. I do honestly mean it when I say I appreciate the efforts of previous councils, the previous councillor, and the others who have kept St. Mark's on the radar. I know there's been all kinds of chatter and debate over maybe just selling it. I believe, through you, Chair, actually, can you confirm, I thought I saw it in the report, actually, council made that attempt, but it was voted down. What was the mandate of this term of council related to just putting it out for surplus, through you, Chair?
Through the chair, the direction that we received from council was specifically to look at St. Mark's as a cultural programming space that was administered by Whitehorn. So we were not involved in doing a surplus program or anything like that. So that's what this report was about.
And how much do we spend on the stabilization this term of council? Through you, Chair? Around 600?
No, through the chair, it was about 200,000 because I believe the 600,000 included the purchase price.
Purchase price. So all in, a little over 6 so far to date, thanks to the commitment of this and previous councils. What's the, if we did nothing, what happens? If we just mothball, through you, Chair? We've been doing not much really for some time now.
Well, through the chair, we've been working on stabilizing it as much, so that's ensuring that, we're keeping the animals out, we're keeping the water out, that type of thing, so that any deterioration is minimized. There are some things we can mothball it, which means you just secure the building and leave it. You can continue the restoration on the project, or you can declare it surplus if that's council's will, and then it would go to real estate at that point.
But today you're asking that we receive this feasibility study and we contemplate debating it in the future. And what date would that be? What are we targeting for an operating plan to be presented to GIC, through you, Chair? Roughly speaking.
Yeah, through the chair, what we're looking at is that we complete the financial and operating plan based on the model that's presented today. We expect to come back to you Q2 2015. We will then look at our capital request submission for 2016, which would be in 2015, that we would have to come back for that. Planning would be completed by mid-2016. Procurement would end by the end of 2016. Construction by mid-2017. Fit-up completed by the end of 2017, and then the facility would open in early 2018.
Okay, thank you, Anna. And again, thank you to you and staff for continuing to engage. It really was quite a PIC, kitty corner to City Hall as it relates to getting community stakeholder input. I think there was close to 300. It's in the report that attended. I was there. I know Councillor Pearson was there with her interest in heritage. Through you, Chair, stakeholder consultation would continue then, Anna, as if we were to move forward here today?
Through the chair, that's correct, especially with the Durand Neighborhood Association.
Okay. Lots of interest since the report hit the agenda. Certainly a lot of communication to the Ward 2 office, and people are very, very interested. Those who are not just interested in heritage, but cultural programming. It's a good report, very thorough, and I know folks will be happy to hear that they can continue to engage on this should we move forward today. In particular, thanks obviously to the Durand Neighborhood Association. Madam Chair, given all of the investment we've made to date, and really what's before us now, is just let's get more into this for the near future and for the future council in 2015 to consider. I'm more than happy as the Ward 2 councillor to move what's before us at the appropriate time. Seconded by Ward 3's Councillor Morrow.
Thank you, appreciate that. I'll put you both on the list. I have Councillor Collins and Councillor Whitehead.
Thanks, Madam Chairman, and I'm certainly supportive of obtaining more information. However, Council could find itself in a position next term where we are today. We have a facility that we're not using, and we don't have the resources to either reconstruct it or to operate it. So my fear is that in just taking this route alone, we limit our options and we limit our choices. And as you know, we have another facility, Akmar. We put an RFP on Akmar. We have a group that's working in the neighborhood with the local councillor on that. And we were looking at options and alternatives. And I think the same should hold true for St. Mark's. It's really no different as well. That we know what's going on with the James Street Baptist Church there. And so there may be some private interest in the private sector to purchase this or to utilize it for other purposes. And so we all know how competitive the capital budget process is, so it will not be an easy task to insert this, even if council says, you know what, we want to use this for cultural purposes, storage space, office space. It will not be an easy process to just insert this into the capital budget process ahead of all the other priorities. And so I would like to give direction today, as we did with Akmar, to ask staff to put out an open expression of interest or an RFP that would run concurrent with what Councillor Farr and the Neighbourhood Association is working on, so that council would have an opportunity in 2015 to look at all of their options. And you know, I think in a perfect world, this would be a tax-producing property. This would either people would be living there, working there. We'd still have the green space. Someone would come in and hopefully either restore or convert the building into something, an alternative use. So I'm not, I think, again, we're limiting our opportunities and just going ahead with what's in front of us here, and I think we need to broaden our horizons and include some kind of a direction that seeks, at the very least, to issue an expression of interest to find out if there is private interest or partners in the community who might see an alternative use for this property, respecting, of course, the rich history that's on the site and its proximity to the broader neighborhood. So I'd like to understand if there's support on the committee to, again, that would be for information purposes, that doesn't lock us into anything. We can certainly pull out of that process just as easily as we can pull out of this process here. So I put that on the table for your consideration and others, and would be willing to put a motion or provide staff direction with that if there's support.
We'll come back. Councillor White.
Yeah, I think the conversation started, excuse me, with the good councillor Ward 2, making comparative between St. Mark's and Akmar. So I'm going to ask our heritage culture, would you make that same comparison?
Through the chair, the comparison would be that they are both significant heritage buildings that are owned by the city that are not currently in use.
So if we took a matrix in regards to what we need to preserve in this community from a heritage point of view, would St. Mark's and Akmar be in the same category?
Through the chair, just if you did a comparison of designations, they both have designations on them. The difference would be is that Akmar has a heritage conservation easement, which is controlled by the province. St. Mark's does not have that on it.
Appreciate that. I just want to make the fact that there is a distinction between the two. And I would say from a historic point of view, and I'm surprised Anna's being reserved here right now, but to suggest that Akmar House isn't a significant historic part of our fabric and history compared to St. Mark's has got some relevance, I would think. Certainly, if I go with the community and say that now St. Mark's is at the same level as Akmar, it wouldn't be sell very well with the Friends of Akmar. So again, I can ask the question, from a historic impact point of view in this community, you're putting it on the same level?
Through the chair, that would be a difficult question to answer, just because the designations are different and the values around them are different. So you're comparing the values of someone like Buchanan, who was a big city builder, but this church had great value to the community it was in, the neighborhood it was in, and the values it has around that. So they're very difficult to compare.
Appreciate that. That's a difference, by the way, between some communities and our communities. We're afraid to identify significance versus minor. In Halifax, they do that. for whatever reason, we put everything in the same category, and so therefore it makes it very difficult for this council to highlight what we need to preserve versus, what we can let go. And that's unfortunate, and that's a matrix we need to work on. I guess the other concern I have, and Councillor Collins mentioned this, is that I was told clearly from this council that we can't take more money pits on. We need to find private or partnerships that will come to the table and facilitate the saving of those particular landmarks. So in the wisdom of this council and wisdom what I heard from around this table, I stood up to the plate and supported us go with an RFP process, take a look at whether we can create partnerships, private sector partnerships and private sector interests that could both preserve the heritage nature of those buildings, provide public access, and take it off the books, which is the most important thing, financial books, of the taxpayers of this community. So if that's the theme and the trend that's being put forward, I'm trying to understand why that's not applying to St. Mark's. And for clarification, my understanding is the Culture Division came back and did not recommend this. They didn't recommend going out to an RP. What they recommended is to run cultural programs out of Whitehorn. Is that correct?
Through the chair, the direction that council gave us was to just look at using St. Mark's as a cultural programming facility operated or administered by Whitehorn. So that was our direction, and that's what the report is before.
Was that as a result of a recommendation or an option put forward by staff, or is that just was politically driven?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Through the.
So I have no problem going forward with the feasibility. I agree with Councillor Collins. I mean, I'm doing everything I can to ensure that we're protecting the buildings at the same time protecting the taxpayer. I would think that that would be a constant and a common interest with everyone around this table to be able to do both. Green space, no question, there's an efficiency in the Durand neighborhood, but we're not talking about giving up. We're talking about a building here. We're not talking about green space. We're talking about taking a building, running a program. And can I ask, is this, all these numbers, that incorporate life cycle capital costs of the building?
Through the chair, no, that's the capital cost that we had determined there was a very high level scan of what it would just cost to get it up to running condition at this point.
So you have in the revenue generated and the ongoing life cycle costs and maintenance costs of the building, is that included?
What's the numbers that you're seeing in the report right now are the costs to just get it operating. So the capital numbers there are the operating costs. So what we've asked is to come back with the financial and operating plan that would include those types of numbers in it.
So it is feasible that the revenue, the top revenue generated would be less than the cost of holding on to the building with these numbers currently?
I'm sorry, Councillor, I don't
understand. If you're not including all the life cycle costs and maintenance of the building, and you're looking at what the potential is in regards to generating revenue, will that revenue offset not just the operating everyday cost and the maintenance cost, but the life cycle cost in a reserve to replace roofs and other structures as years go by?
So through the chair, the costs that you see in front of you are just very high level. This was a feasibility study. That's why we have asked through the recommendation that we come back with a very detailed report back to you on the operating and capital costs. So those would include your life cycle costs. We would do a lot more analysis on revenue, et cetera. So you can get better numbers. That's why we wanted to come back with the second report.
And can I ask, so the examples you cite, so Whitehorn, I take it as a break-even proposition. The taxpayers aren't subsidizing that facility at all because of the revenue generating?
Through the chair, Whitehorn is a National Historic Site. It's a public museum. So no, we don't, through the revenues that we make, it does not break even for that particular, nor is any of the other museums that are under our control.
So could you help me understand what comparative do you use then to determine that this could be sustainable if the examples we have are not?
So the examples that we used were the proportion of the museums that we have for these type of activities, such as weddings, programming, that type of thing. So if you look at Dundurn Castle, it would be the coach house. If you look at Whitehorn, it's the stable that was reconfigured about 10 years back for these types of purposes. So we're looking at the square footage there, the types of activities, how much revenues are coming in, and we did a comparison that way.
Okay, and did you look at compact impact statements in regards to, if you did that, what it would do in regards to your current activities at Dundurn and Whitehorn?
Through the chair, we believe that it would just complement it because we are in deficits, especially around the wedding trade. People are always looking for very unique locations to be married in. So we always have more ask than we have space to be able to accommodate.
Okay, so I am supportive of moving forward and getting more information, and we need to be doing that to make the best decisions on informed decision. But I do support the fact that if it can't be sustainable, and that means the taxpayer's on the hook forever and a day, that's a non-starter for me. So you need a backup plan. What is the backup plan?
Through the chair, it would be at the discretion of council to tell us to do a non-binding RFP to see if there is companies out there, organizations that would like to take this on.
Appreciate it. So that's back to being consistent with how we're dealing with Achiemore. I think we need consistency in regards to how we deal with these heritage properties, and we shouldn't be treating any historic property any different from a corporate point of view. So I certainly support Councillor Collins' proposal.
Okay, thank you. I have Councillor Morrow, Councillor Ferguson, myself, and Councillor Farr for a second time. Councillor Morrow.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think both this and Achiemore are very important. I don't think we should get into an argument over what's good about either or both. They're both good. And I think it's important to support this recommendation. I'm certainly not opposed to looking at other options, private sector included, or public-private partnerships. But I think this is the best way to start. I think it's also important to maintain faith in the idea that we should preserve those very special buildings. And while there's a lot of interest in that among quite a few people in the community, it's also easy to decide that enough is enough and we should just let them get torn down or changed. In fact, this was an Anglican church. The Anglican diocese, when I was mayor, wanted to redevelop the project into housing, social housing, if I'm not mistaken, other social uses, which was entirely valid and meritorious, but opposed by the neighborhood and by the city. And it was perceived to be not only a building of heritage value, but an oasis. There are other gardens there that are a great little part of that quadrant on 3 of the 4 sides, including our back corner of City Hall and, of course, Central School. So I think it's important to proceed with this. I won't oppose other options coming in, and I'm glad that this is here, and I hope it leads to something fast. I think we want to keep up to date on these projects so we can keep doing it. There is a strong body, and as I mentioned in the community, of opinion that we should. But again, it's easy to criticize it, and that has to be considered too. So I'm excited about this, compliment the council for previously having pushed it, and the staff for putting the recommendation together. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Ferguson, Mayor Bertina, then I'll go back to Councillor Farr a second time.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And first of all, I do support going out and getting more information. It can never hurt to get more information. I also support Councillor Collins' suggestion that we also look at the RFP side, because I get mixed stories on these sort of things, probably through you to Anna. Recently, a couple of years ago, we talked about having to demolish the Sunday school because it was beyond repair, and putting scaffolding in to support the roof. And it sounded to me at that time like we had to fix the place up to condemn it. But now we think for $2 million we can bring it back to life, and the number just sounds low for a big structure that previously was reported to us as being in very tough shape. So I look forward to more information on this. I wouldn't mind even getting a tour of it. But one question through you to Anna. Anna, they talked about, Chad talked about the RFP as part of this process, and we went out for an expression of interest in Achiemore last year. and got, I think, 6 or 7 interested parties. Has that RFP been issued yet? And if so, when's it closed or has it closed?
Through the chair. So we did do an EOI, and we did get about 6 or 7 strong interests. So the council asked us to do a non-binding RFP for Ockmar, so that if they were not happy with the use that came forward, if someone came, that they could turn it down. So that non-binding has been a bit of an issue figuring it out, because it is a very unusual type of RFP to issue. So we've been working very closely with both procurement and legal services, and we believe that we will be issuing at the 1st of July, but it's been a bit of a struggle trying to get that document together to make sure that it's going to service council the way they wanted it to do.
Okay. I'm surprised it's taken this long. You need a clause saying that unless, it's like a reserved bid in an auction, that unless we get an acceptable proposal, we won't accept it. And originally, Anna, you told us that it was going to be out in February. Now it's July. I just worry that stuff drags on. With 7 people interested, we got to strike while the iron's hot. And there was some interesting proposals that come in too of how to effectively put that back into active use and protect the heritage easement that's on it. So I get more information, absolutely. I like Chad's amendment or new resolution. I hope he's back in time to place it. And you need to expedite Ockmar. It's just dragging too much. Thanks.
Mayor Pacina.
Thank you. I actually started this process in 2009, and it's continued basically to the point where we are. I can tell you that the reason the commercial proposals fell through was that most of the commercial proposals required some parking or some reduction or elimination of the green space. Now, the statement was made that it's not green space, it's a building. And that's okay in the sensibilities of a suburban area where there are front lawns that are bigger than that green space. But when you're living in a dense urban fabric, that's green space. Some of the parkettes in New York and Manhattan and Chicago, beautiful little places. We've got some great ones in the Stinson neighborhood and so on, hardly anything to them. You drive by, you wouldn't notice, but when you live there, that is green space. And so that's why the proposals that came, restaurants, all this stuff, they wanted to take away, they needed the parking. And the argument that you could park in City Hall didn't seem to come forward. Now, that's going back a few years now in my memory of how this was unfolding. So I think it's useful and worthwhile to continue to move ahead and gather more information. But I'm telling you, that's green space. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Farr.
Sounds as if we're looking at moving forward with the 2 recommendations, and then here comes Ward 5's Chad Collins with, I guess, a further motion to look at, again, look at the RFP objective. I'm supportive, but we'll see what comes back and then really make that decision. Ultimately, who knows? I mean, that's another term of council when that does return, quite obviously. But I would hope that similar opportunities are offered with respect to, as aforementioned, the park space, and that is appreciated with an RFP process, that the public access and the opportunities, if not for the city as a whole, are wedding photos, but opportunities at the very least for those devoted folks in the neighborhood to have some access and maybe create a partnership similar to the ones I was alluding to earlier. Even if we look at and we'll see what comes back, but a severance of the park from the actual structure or facility. You know, at planning yesterday, you'll recall, Madam Deputy Mayor, there was a notice of motion that we review our delegated authority as it relates to heritage alterations, we call them. Some in the community are concerned that when you consider percentages, and St. James was referenced, or James Street Baptist was referenced, it's quite a substantial portion of that building, and they may call it a demolition. So that also needs to very much be appreciated, and certainly I'll be looking closely at that as it relates to an RFP or a private sector interest. Fine, just like this committee appears to be appealing to what's before us in terms of a staff recommendation that I proudly move along with my colleague, Councillor Morrow. I can also appreciate and support an RFP process, but obviously for future, watch that closely. So thank you.
Councillor McCaddy.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just wanted to support Mayor Bettina's comments. We've been down this RFP path before, and the way it occurred, as I remember it, was staff actually prepared some drawings. They had some drawings prepared just to give people a sense as to what could be done. The Sunday school removed, and changes made and that sort of thing. So we've been down that pathway, and Mayor Bettina is exactly right. It all came back down to parking, because it would have to be on the green space. There's no room on the property itself where the building is. So I wonder about the wisdom of going down that pathway again, or whether we should be focusing on other properties where we have possibilities and we haven't fully fleshed out whether there are other uses for those throughout the city. So we can certainly do that, but I don't anticipate we'll find, unfortunately, I don't think we'll find any different result given the size of this property. It's quite small, and there's really not a lot of room to create something, especially if parking is required, which inevitably it always is, and that eats into the green space, that very small green space that is important to the Durand neighborhood.
Thank you. I'm going to go back now to Councillor Farr. Are you going to move the two recommendations, sir, to put them on the floor?
Yep, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Morrow.
Okay, so the two recommendations there, and then I'll come to Councillor Collins for an amendment, or you'll add that after, Councillor Collins? Okay, so on the recommendation, the two recommendations being moved by Councillor Farr, second by Councillor Morrow, all in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none. Councillor Collins?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Marula, that the real estate section, in partnership with the city's Revenue Generation Office, issue and advertise an EOI RFP for the St. Mark's facility, and that the marketing and advertising of the EOI RFP run concurrent with the feasibility study. I would add, and I think those were great points in terms of the parking. There's no reason why we couldn't, as part of that process, and maybe it's something that needs to come back as part of our terms of reference. There's no reason why we couldn't look at utilizing a portion of our own parking lot here. We're here every day. Most days, that corner of the lot in particular has empty spots associated with it. And so I would suggest that we be creative, that staff be creative as part of this. Certainly that would need to come back to committee. I don't want to assume anything at this point in time. But if parking is the issue, if it meant 5 or 6 parking spaces, excuse me, to be leased to someone who's operating an office, who might convert that into residential, who may have some kind of a mixed use, why we would stand in the way of that, knowing that we have parking here that might be offered to them, is beyond me. So I put this simply to start us off along this road, and hopefully staff can come back. Mr. Hertel has been very creative at solving problems for us in the past. He's worked miracles with other issues. I would suggest this is probably a good fit for him and his staff, and so that's why I've referenced the revenue generation in there.
Thank you, Councillor. And Anna Bradford wanted to respond with regards to the parking. I have you, Councillor Whitehead.
Through the chair, actually, it was more on the RFP, the issuing of the RFP. So I believe that this should form part of this report as C, recommendation going forward. And could I just clarify with the councillor whether he wants an RFP or a non-binding RFP, because the difference is quite significant?
Yes, it would be non-binding because we want options and alternatives. So that's why I put in there the expression of interest, the RFP. I leave it to staff to give them the greatest flexibility to come up with something that hopes to market this property to its fullest potential.
Okay, understood there. Thank you. Now I have Councillor Farr and then Councillor Whitehead to this.
Friendly amendment, I know, to be privy to time, Madam Deputy Mayor, that if the mover would include wordage to this end, an RFP that respects, or a process that respects the current heritage designation and the existing limited park space.
Councillor Collins.
A process that would respect the current heritage designation and existing limited park space.
That would be a given, would it not? It's a designated building. Anna, could you just clarify, would that not be a given in the process because it is designated?
It is, through the chair, it is designated, but it's always helpful to provide all that information within an RFP.
We can't take that out of the process when it's advertised. Certainly, we would make anyone who's interested aware of those facts, absolutely.
Okay, but I thought, if I still have the floor, that I heard in the debate that, parking is an issue, park space is also an issue, and I'm sorry if I missed it, but altering in any way the limited amount of property that we have in front of the structure, I wouldn't even want to contemplate that. I wouldn't even want to make that part of the RFP process.
Through the chair, so it's the building that's designated, it isn't the property, so if you want to include that to ensure that the property is kept within its parcel or intact, then we should include that.
Well, I would like to include that if I may, and if the mover would at least consider that. Thank you.
Okay. I have a speakers list, Councillor. Sorry, I'm going to go to Councillor Whitehead, then Councillor Marula.
Thank you. Can I just ask, is there not...
If I still have the floor, I thought I had the floor. I'm asking the mover if he would consider that.
I will
Through
go
you.
back to the mover
Okay,
at the
thanks.
appropriate time. The mover's thinking about it. I saw the wheels turning, so I'm just going to give him an opportunity. Councillor Whitehead. And he did, sir. It's been taken care of. Councillor Whitehead, please.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to be clear that there's a big chunk of green space right across the street called City Hall by Hunter and Bay. So we're talking actually this piece of green space is actually smaller than the green space that's available right across the street from it. So it's not congruent, understood, but to suggest there's no green space in that particular area, well, City Hall. But the other thing that surprises me is that staff have done their due diligence and indicated that they believe it can generate revenue because there's 500 parking spots within 7-minute walk of the location. So I'm trying to understand from an RFP point of view, if that's the case, then there's probably a good opportunity even for business to utilize those 500 parking spots within a 7-minute walk of the location. And then you add on the fact that in the evenings and weekends, where most weddings and that take place, City Hall has a good capacity to accommodate the activity at this location. So parking seems to be, at least on the city side, running a commercial venture for weddings and so forth. There seems to be a justification that it could work. And parking doesn't seem to be an impediment for us, so that's why the RFP or the motion that Councillor Collins is putting forward is warranted to at least explore and determine if that's in fact the case.
Councillor Marula.
Madam Deputy Mayor, I think the green space question is a relative one. And I think it's important that we also acknowledge the fact that we have a green space deficiency in wards 2, 3, and 4. We work diligently in trying to mitigate that. I know in my proposal for Delta High School, it would be a hybrid with a condo and / park development along the same lines. I would hope that we would respect the scenario here. I think if we build it into the RFQ, and when we're dealing with these types of issues, it's more of an RFQ than an RFP. And in saying that, I think we build it into that process to ensure that it is protected as green space accordingly.
Thank you. Now I'm going to, not to cut Councillor Farr off when you were speaking, but I'm going to turn now to Councillor Collins and be sure. I just want to keep the meeting going because we did have the representative to go in camera for 1 o'clock and we're past the hour. Councillor Collins, you're okay with reflecting? Councillor Farr, you're hearing this? Okay, so we have Councillor Collins' motion seconded by Councillor Marula as item C added to the recommendation. Councillor Farr.
Can I hear it?
Councillor Collins, can you just read that off again? I'm sorry, sir, you're being asked to read that off again.
Marula's telling me what he watched on TV last night. That the real estate section in partnership with City's Revenue Generation Office issue and advertise an EOI RFP for the St. Mark's facility, and that the marketing and advertising of the EOI RFP run concurrent with the feasibility study and take into consideration the need for green space and the heritage designation.
All in favor? Carried. Any opposed? Seeing none, thank you. Now, Madam Clerk, I'm going to ask Shall we go now to the in-camera items, the representatives here? Sorry, I apologize, on item 8.3 as amended. All in favor? Carried. Thank you, Councillor. So we'll go on to, we're going to leave the motions, I'm going to go on, sorry, Neil? My apologies.
Through Madam Chair, that should read EOI non-binding.
Correct. Councillor
RFP.
Collins, it's EOI, yes. EOI or RP, non-binding.
Non-binding.
But non-binding. Thank you. Okay? Thank you. So, Madam Clerk, I'm just going to go on page 7. The members of committee may have a motion to move into closed session pursuant to subsections B and C of the city's procedural bylaw and section 239.2 of the Ontario Municipal Act 2001 as amended, as the subject matters pertain to A, item 12.2, a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality or local board respecting funding for the purchase of Memorial School in Ancaster, and B, item 12.3, personal matters about unidentifiable individuals, including municipal or local employees respecting accounts receivable systems review. All in favor? Carried. Yes, sir. We're doing the in-camera part, Councillor, that I suggested, and when we come back out, we will do that. Because the gentleman was, our representative was supposed to be here for 1.
Please don't be so arbitrary.
Then that's fine, then we can do that at the appropriate time, Councillor. Thank you. 12.3, we have the representative here. Thank you. And the mover and seconder to move in camera now, Councillor Johnson, Councillor Collins, all in favor? Carried.